Max had always dreamed of being in the spotlight. But never, in his wildest imagination, did he picture himself standing at the heart of a bustling, high-profile state dinner at the White House. A prestigious event where political figures, world leaders, and billionaires would be dining together, an invitation few ever received, and even fewer were chosen to serve at. For a young chef who had risen from the ranks of a small kitchen in Brooklyn, this was the opportunity of a lifetime. But Max wasn't just any chef. He was the chef. He had worked hard to make a name for himself. His culinary talent had earned him recognition, but he had always stayed grounded. He wasn't the type to let success go to his head, even when his dishes were praised by critics, or when his restaurant was fully booked weeks in advance. Still, this was different. This event wasn't just about cooking. It was about creating a moment, a memory. A night where the world would be watching. The guest list was a who's who of the world's most powerful people, and among them was none other than Elon Musk, the billionaire tech mogul. Elon Musk, who had revolutionized industries with his companies, who was as famous for his Twitter rants as he was for his electric cars and space adventures. A man who had captivated the world with his unconventional approach to everything. Max had heard rumors that Musk was difficult. That he was outspoken, and sometimes his opinions were as bold as his business ventures. But Max was no stranger to pressure. He had seen the highs and lows of the culinary world, where the heat of the kitchen was the least of your worries. If anyone could handle a man like Musk, it was Max. But the question remained, how would the evening unfold? Max stood in the kitchen, checking the details for the final time. His heart raced as he envisioned the faces of the guests, especially Musk's. There was something about this night that felt different. Something that Max couldn't shake off. His stomach tightened with a mixture of excitement and nerves. He had created a special menu, a tribute to the diversity of American cuisine, with an elegant twist. But all that could be overshadowed by one unpredictable moment. Just as the last of the staff prepared the platters, a voice cut through the air. It was one of the event organizers, giving last-minute instructions. Max nodded absently, his mind still focused on the dishes in front of him. But the moment that caught him off guard was when the organizer mentioned the most famous guest of the evening. Remember, Musk's table is the most important tonight. We want him to be impressed. No mistakes. The pressure was mounting. Max took a deep breath and forced himself to focus. It was just another dinner service. Except, this was the dinner of a lifetime. Later that evening, the dining room was buzzing with conversation. The guests, in their elegant suits and gowns, sipped champagne as they admired the intricate decorations adorning the White House dining hall. From the polished floors to the golden chandeliers overhead, everything exuded luxury. The food had been expertly prepared, a masterpiece that Max and his team had labored over for weeks. Every detail was meticulously planned. But what Max hadn't anticipated was the effect Elon Musk's presence would have on the room. Musk entered the room like a force of nature. His tall figure and confident stride immediately drew attention. His signature black blazer, paired with a white shirt, looked out of place in the sea of formal tuxedos, yet he still commanded attention. Max watched as the billionaire exchanged pleasantries with the guests, his voice easily cutting through the chatter. Musk's energy was electric, almost unnerving. It was the kind of presence that could alter the dynamic of the room, even the atmosphere of the evening. Max tried not to focus too much on the man but couldn't help himself. He had to admit, it was difficult not to be intrigued by someone who seemed to operate in a completely different stratosphere. The time came for the first course to be served. Max stood at the edge of the kitchen, his heart pounding. He was just another chef in the grand scheme of things. But tonight, he was at the helm of something much bigger than himself. The first course was placed on the table in front of Musk. He glanced at it, a small frown forming on his face as he picked up his fork. The air seemed to hold its breath. Max was watching closely, hoping for the faintest sign of approval, but instead, Musk pushed the plate slightly away from him, his expression unreadable. Max's chest tightened. He tried to remind himself that it was just one dish. But the tension in the room was palpable. And then Musk spoke. "This is a bit underwhelming, don't you think?" His voice was calm, but the weight of his words made the room grow still. "I expected something more innovative. A little more exciting." Max felt the blood drain from his face. He had spent hours perfecting that dish. The recipe was a carefully crafted balance of flavors. But Musk, the one person who could destroy or elevate a chef's career with a single comment, wasn't impressed. The entire room seemed to pause. There it was. The first crack in the evening's smooth surface. Max's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know whether to be angry or humiliated. A part of him wanted to lash out, to defend his creation, but another part of him knew that would only escalate the situation. But that question lingered in Max's mind: how would this evening end? Would he crumble under the weight of Musk's criticism, or would he find a way to turn the situation around? One thing was for sure: this wasn't going to be just another night. It was going to be a battle, one that Max had never expected to face. And as the evening unfolded, Max would soon learn that the biggest challenge wasn't preparing exquisite food. It was standing up to the forces of power and prestige that came with the territory of an event like this. As the dinner continued, Max took another deep breath, pushing his worries to the back of his mind. The night wasn't over. And he wasn't going to let one comment destroy everything he had worked for. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Max had come a long way from the narrow, greasy kitchens of Brooklyn. His journey to this moment was not one of instant fame or easy success. It was one of grit, persistence, and passion for something greater than just food. It was about creating something that left a mark, something that made people feel. But as he reflected on how he got to where he was now, at the pinnacle of his career, the memories of his humble beginnings loomed large. Growing up in a small, cramped apartment with his mother, Linda, Max had learned early on that life wasn't about material wealth, it was about survival and finding joy in the little things. His mother, a schoolteacher, had always done her best to provide for him, working long hours to make sure he had what he needed. Though they didn't have much, there was always love, laughter, and a sense of family around the dinner table. And that's where Max's passion for cooking had first blossomed. Linda wasn't a gourmet chef. Far from it. But she could make a simple meal feel like a feast. The smell of her homemade pasta sauce simmering on the stove was a memory Max carried with him throughout his life. It was during those family meals that he first saw how food could bring people together, how it could create moments of joy and connection. As a teenager, Max found solace in the kitchen. It wasn't just about eating, it was about the art of creation. He'd spent hours experimenting with different flavors, combining ingredients in ways that fascinated him. There was an unspoken connection between Max and food. He could feel it in the way a dish came together, the way a recipe came to life with each ingredient, each stir of the spoon. For him, cooking was more than just a way to feed people, it was a language, a means of expression, and a way to connect with others. But, as with any dream, the road to success wasn't smooth. After high school, Max decided to follow his passion and attend culinary school. The decision wasn't an easy one, he knew it would be a tough, long journey. But there was a fire in him that couldn't be ignored. He dropped out of college and took a part-time job at a local diner to save up for culinary school. The pay was low, the hours long, but it didn't matter. He was determined to make it work. In the early days, Max worked in kitchens that smelled of burnt grease and fast food. The head chefs were temperamental, and the hours were grueling. There were days when he wanted to quit, when the kitchen felt like a battleground. But he kept pushing forward. He remembered his mother's words, "Don't ever let anyone tell you you can't do something." Eventually, after years of working his way up, Max landed a job at one of the finest restaurants in New York City. He started as a line cook, sweating over the stove in the heat of the kitchen, but slowly, his talent began to shine through. His creativity in the kitchen, paired with his unwavering work ethic, caught the attention of the head chef, who began to mentor him. Max learned the ins and outs of fine dining, the delicate balance between technique and artistry that made food an experience. The years of struggle finally paid off when Max was given the opportunity to lead his own kitchen. His restaurant, Mosaic, became known for its bold flavors and innovative dishes that played with textures, ingredients, and cultural influences. The restaurant quickly earned rave reviews, and soon, Max was being invited to speak at culinary events, becoming a name people recognized. He was no longer just a young chef from Brooklyn, he was a force to be reckoned with. But despite all of his success, Max remained grounded. He remembered where he came from, how hard his mother had worked to get him here, and the sacrifices she had made. Linda had always been his rock, his biggest supporter, and the person who kept him focused when the pressures of the culinary world seemed too much to bear. It was Linda who encouraged him to take the next step in his career. To attend the prestigious event at the White House. At first, Max was hesitant. He had never been the type to chase fame or glory. But Linda saw the opportunity for what it was, a moment to take his career to the next level. She told him, "Max, this could change everything. You've worked so hard. This is your time to shine." So, with her encouragement, Max accepted the invitation to cook at the state dinner. The idea of preparing a meal for so many influential people, including someone like Musk, was intimidating. But Max knew that he wasn't just cooking for the guests, he was cooking for himself. This was his chance to prove that he belonged in the same room as these giants. As he prepared for the event, memories of his journey, the long nights in the kitchen, the struggles, the sacrifices, came flooding back. He thought about his mother, and how she had always believed in him, even when he wasn't sure if he believed in himself. But he wasn't just cooking for Linda anymore. He was cooking for everyone who had ever doubted him, for every critic who had questioned his ability to make it in the cutthroat world of fine dining. And, now, he was about to serve a dish to Elon Musk, the man who had revolutionized technology, who had made billions on a vision that seemed impossible. Max couldn't afford to fail. Not tonight. As the day of the dinner approached, Max found himself growing more anxious. The menu he had curated, designed to reflect the diversity of American cuisine, was perfect in his eyes, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something could go wrong. There was so much riding on this event. But in the back of his mind, Max kept thinking of his mother's voice, "Don't let anyone take away your confidence. You've worked too hard for this." With the dinner drawing closer, Max steeled himself for what lay ahead. This was the moment. The moment when everything he had worked for would either come together, or it would all fall apart. And standing at the edge of the kitchen, watching the clock tick down to the evening's event, Max knew that no matter what happened, this was his time. His journey had led him here. He was ready. Max stood in the bustling kitchen, the clattering of pans and the rhythmic hum of the stove surrounding him. The team was hard at work, a well-oiled machine designed to deliver perfection. But despite the chaos around him, Max couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Tonight wasn't just another high-profile dinner. This wasn't like the gala events where celebrities came and went with little more than a polite smile and a nod. No, tonight's crowd was different. The stakes were higher, the expectations even more so. And as the head chef of the event, Max was under more pressure than ever before. The kitchen, though efficient, felt like a pressure cooker itself, its temperature rising with each passing minute. Max's eyes darted around as his team worked feverishly to plate the dishes. The various courses were timed precisely, each requiring Max's touch to bring it all together. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes, not tonight. The eyes of the world were on him, and more importantly, the eyes of one man, the most unpredictable, influential guest of the evening, Elon Musk. Max had heard the stories. Musk was a man of extremes, either he was completely captivated by something or completely indifferent. It was this unpredictability that had made him a legend in both the tech world and beyond. But in a way, this made Max more nervous than he cared to admit. As a chef, he was used to pressure. But the pressure of preparing a meal for one of the most powerful men in the world, while also being watched by an elite crowd, was a different animal altogether. The first course had already been served, and Max couldn't shake the image of Musk's reaction. The billionaire's cold, almost dismissive look had sent a chill through the kitchen, and the energy had shifted. It wasn't just the dish. It was the weight of his words. Underwhelming, Musk had said. That word had haunted Max's thoughts ever since. Was it the dish that fell short? Was it the timing? Or was it something more? Max didn't know, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it. He had a job to do, and he needed to focus. Max, we need those plates for the second course. Let's move it. Chef Liam's voice cut through the tension. Max turned, his eyes quickly scanning the dish in front of him. Everything needed to be perfect. One slip up, and it would all unravel. As he double-checked the second course, a delicate seared duck breast with a cherry reduction, he felt a rush of heat surge through his chest. He hadn't planned for a potential setback like this. He hadn't prepared for the unpredictable nature of a guest like Musk. And yet, the first course had already been a misstep. How would the next one be received? The seconds seemed to drag as the waitstaff moved toward the tables, their movements smooth, calculated. Max's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the plates, making sure each dish looked exactly as it should. This was about more than just flavor, it was about perfection on a level he'd never experienced before. With the plates in hand, Max moved to the dining room, his heart pounding in his ears. The guests were murmuring amongst themselves, their voices muffled by the thick air of tension. And there, at the center of it all, was Musk, sitting at the head of the table, his face as unreadable as ever. Max's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't help but notice the way Musk's eyes scanned the room, almost as if he were assessing every detail. Every gesture, every word, every dish would be scrutinized, and there was no room for error. As the waitstaff served the second course, Max stood at the far end of the room, trying to gauge Musk's reaction from a distance. He watched as the billionaire took his first bite. The world seemed to hold its breath in that moment. For a brief second, Max saw a flicker of something, maybe appreciation, maybe curiosity, as Musk's eyes narrowed in concentration. But then, just as quickly, it disappeared. Musk placed his fork down, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and turned to the guest beside him, engaging in a quiet conversation. Max's stomach twisted. Was that all the recognition his dish would get? Had his effort been in vain? His heart raced as doubts began to creep in. Had he overestimated himself? Was he simply not enough to impress someone like Musk? But before Max could spiral too far into his thoughts, one of the waitstaff came over, her face a mix of concern and curiosity. "Chef, Mr. Musk, he'd like to speak with you," she said quietly. Max's blood ran cold. He felt his palms begin to sweat, and for a moment, everything around him seemed to blur. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading. Would Musk tear apart his dish? Would he call attention to the underwhelming quality of the meal? Or would he have something else entirely to say? He took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. This was the moment that would define his career, the moment that could either elevate him to greater heights or destroy everything he had worked for. As Max made his way toward the table, he felt his legs heavy, as though every step was a battle. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Every guest seemed to be watching him now. He could feel their eyes on his back, some of them curious, others judgmental. The spotlight had never felt so suffocating. When he reached Musk's table, he stood there for a moment, unsure how to begin. Musk, ever the enigmatic figure, looked up at him with an unreadable expression. "Max, right?" Musk's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that Max couldn't place. "I've been thinking about your duck." Max swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Yes, Mr. Musk." Musk leaned back slightly in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. It's not bad. But it's not what I was expecting. It's too safe. Too traditional. Max's heart skipped a beat. The words felt like a punch to his gut. Safe. Traditional. These were the very things Max had fought against in his career. He had built his reputation on pushing boundaries, on taking risks, on reimagining the classics. The last thing he ever wanted was to be considered safe. I can respect that, Max said, forcing himself to keep his composure. I wanted to create something that felt familiar but elevated. Something that would resonate with everyone in the room. Musk nodded slowly, his expression still unreadable. I get that. But what I want is something unexpected. Something that shocks me in a good way. Max didn't know how to respond. The weight of Musk's words hung in the air, and for a moment, it felt like the entire room was holding its breath. Could he rise to this challenge? Could he create something that would truly leave a lasting impression on Musk and the guests? Max took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his ambition pushing him forward. I'll do better, he said, his voice steady. I'll make sure the next course surprises you. Musk's lips curled into a faint smile. I'm counting on it. And with that, Max turned and walked away, the room once again falling into a hushed silence. As he headed back to the kitchen, his mind was racing, his thoughts a whirlpool of ideas, fears, and the growing realization that this dinner was about to take a very different turn. Max had been challenged. And now, he had no choice but to rise to the occasion. Max stormed back into the kitchen, his mind racing, heart pounding in his chest. He could still hear Musk's words echoing in his ears, like a constant, nagging presence. Safe. Traditional. Too predictable. Max's hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to calm down. Now wasn't the time for frustration or self-doubt. If he wanted to succeed, he had to do exactly what Musk was asking for. He had to create something that would shock the room. His team was still at work, moving with the precision they had been trained to. The scent of garlic, herbs, and roasting meats filled the air, but it all felt distant now. Max's mind was elsewhere, grappling with the challenge that lay ahead. The next course had to be bold. It had to be unexpected. But what could he create that would truly surprise Musk, a man who had seen and done it all? Max, Chef Liam's voice broke through his thoughts, sharp and commanding. What's the plan? We need that next course prepped and plated, stat. We're running behind. Max looked up, blinking as if he had just snapped out of a trance. The pressure of the evening was starting to weigh on him more heavily now, the atmosphere in the kitchen growing thick with the kind of tension only a high-profile event could generate. He knew he had to make a decision fast. The next course was a pivotal moment. He couldn't afford to let Musk's critique derail everything. His team was waiting for direction, and the clock was ticking. The dinner wasn't going to pause, and neither could he. Max quickly walked over to the station where his sous chef, Olivia, was plating the next dish, a delicate lemon-infused risotto paired with seared scallops. It was a crowd-pleaser, safe and sophisticated, but after Musk's critique, it felt inadequate. Olivia, we need to change course, Max said, his voice sharp but steady. We're not serving this. Olivia's brow furrowed as she looked at him, a mixture of surprise and concern crossing her face. But this dish is already prepped. It's perfect. The flavors are balanced, it's... I know, Max cut in, but it's not enough. We need something unexpected. I've got a new idea. Follow my lead. Max's eyes darted around the kitchen as he scanned the ingredients. The elements of the dish had to be bold, innovative. He needed something that would capture the essence of surprise, the way Musk had described. As his team began to gather around him, Max started to sketch out his new vision for the course. He reached for a small container of black squid ink and placed it on the counter. He would start with a base of something unexpected, something that would immediately grab attention. A blackened sauce, rich with briny depth and a slight bitterness. Next, he turned his attention to the proteins, Wagyu beef and fresh lobster. The combination of the luxurious and the exotic was just what he needed, something to push the boundaries, to merge the familiar with the unfamiliar. This dish needs to challenge people's expectations, Max said, rallying his team. Wagyu beef, lobster, and a squid ink reduction. We're going to balance decadence with a little bit of mystery. It'll be rich, it'll be bold, and it will make everyone stop and pay attention. Liam's eyes widened in disbelief. Wagyu and lobster together. That's a bold move, Max. It's what we need, Max said, his voice steady but filled with determination. We're going to create something that people will remember. Something Musk won't forget. The team worked swiftly under Max's guidance. The tension in the kitchen had shifted, no longer was it a place of stress and uncertainty. It had become a place of purpose, a place where Max could pour his focus into every detail. The scent of the Wagyu beef searing, the bubbling squid ink sauce, and the aroma of freshly prepared lobster filled the kitchen as Max's team executed the dish with precision. This was what Max did best, taking risks, pushing boundaries, and creating something that would make people think. As the final plates were plated and garnished, Max stepped back for a moment to admire the dish. It was a beautiful juxtaposition of textures and colors. The dark black sauce was contrasted by the pale, delicate lobster and the marbled, rich Wagyu beef. It was decadent, bold, and visually stunning. I think this will do the trick, Max said, his voice filled with anticipation. He looked over at Olivia, who was carefully placing the final touches on the plate. How does it look? Perfect, she replied, her eyes gleaming with the same excitement that filled Max's chest. I think this might be the dish that surprises them all. Max nodded, taking a deep breath. It's time. The waitstaff moved swiftly to deliver the new course to the dining room. Max felt his heart pounding in his chest as he watched them disappear into the hallway, carrying the plates. This was the moment of truth. Max stood in the back of the dining room, his eyes scanning the guests. They were all engrossed in conversation, their voices rising and falling in a symphony of polite chatter. But when the first plates were placed in front of the guests, the mood shifted. There was an immediate silence. The kind of silence that you could feel in the air, thick, expectant. Max's eyes darted toward Musk, who had already taken a bite. The billionaire's face remained unreadable, and Max couldn't tell if he was pleased or if the dish had fallen flat. His gaze lingered for a moment, and Max found himself holding his breath. Then, Musk did something unexpected, he looked up from his plate and caught Max's eye. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Now, this is more like it, Musk said, his voice low but filled with an unmistakable note of approval. Max's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected such a direct response, but it was exactly what he needed. The tension that had gripped his chest seemed to loosen, just slightly, but it was enough. As the dinner continued, Max kept an eye on the reactions of the guests. People were talking now, their voices buzzing with excitement, murmuring their approval of the dish. Max could feel the atmosphere in the room shift. What had been a night full of uncertainty was beginning to transform into a celebration of creativity and risk-taking. And then, Musk spoke again, this time a little louder so that everyone at the table could hear. This, he said, this is the kind of thing that makes me excited about food. Bold, unexpected, and it's delicious. Max felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had done it. He had pushed the limits, and the results spoke for themselves. The rest of the evening flowed smoothly. Max's dish had hit the mark, and the rest of the courses seemed to follow suit. The applause at the end of the dinner wasn't just for the food. It was for the journey he had taken to get there. A journey filled with doubt, tension, and the kind of pressure that could break most people. But Max had risen to the challenge. He had proven to himself, and to Musk, that he was more than just a chef. He was a force to be reckoned with. Max stood off to the side of the room, watching as the guests continued to savor the final course of the evening. His heart was still racing, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt this alive, this energized. The high from the success of his bold dish was still lingering in the air, and for the first time that evening, he allowed himself a moment of relief. But even as the applause and chatter swirled around him, his thoughts kept returning to Musk. He had done it. He had impressed the one man who, just hours ago, had criticized him for playing it safe. Musk's approval had felt like a shot of pure validation, but there was still something unsettling about it. Musk was unpredictable, and Max couldn't shake the feeling that the night was far from over. As he stood there, lost in thought, he caught sight of Musk at the far end of the room, engaged in an animated conversation with a few guests. There was a faint smile on his face, but Max could still see the intensity in his eyes. The man was always thinking, always analyzing, and Max knew that, for better or worse, tonight wasn't the end of their interaction. Max's gaze wandered over the room, and his eyes met the faces of his team. They were smiling, laughing, exchanging congratulations. They had pulled off the impossible, but Max knew this success didn't erase the uncertainty that still lingered in the air. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments when they would have to prove themselves again. But tonight, for now, was theirs. Just then, Liam approached, his face breaking into a grin. "Max, you did it, man. That was something else." Musk actually looked impressed. "We've all been talking, and we think you nailed it." Max felt a surge of pride, but it was tempered by a lingering sense of unease. "Yeah, it went well. But there's still something in the air. I feel like I've only scratched the surface with Musk." Liam nodded thoughtfully. "It's Musk. You can never really tell with him. But I think you've earned his respect. Hell, you've earned all of ours." Max let out a small laugh, grateful for the acknowledgement. But deep down, he knew that this moment wouldn't last forever. The pressure, the weight of the expectations, would soon return. It was a cycle Max knew too well. "You sure Musk isn't just toying with me?" Max asked, voice tinged with uncertainty. "He's a hard man to read." Liam clapped him on the back. "That's exactly why you're the best at what you do. You can read the room, feel the pressure, and turn it into something extraordinary. Musk's unpredictable, but you've got the right mentality to handle him." Max felt a strange warmth at Liam's words, but the unease lingered. Even as the evening wound down, he found himself growing more restless, more aware of the looming challenges. The dinner had been a triumph, but it was just one night in a career that would always demand more, always require a new level of creativity and excellence. As the last course was cleared and the evening began to wind down, Max's mind was already turning toward what came next. It was never enough to just succeed once. He had to keep pushing. He had to keep raising the bar. And the only way to do that was to embrace the uncertainty, to confront the fear of failure head-on. And that's when it happened. Max's thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice, a voice that sent a chill down his spine. Well. You really did pull it off, didn't you?" Max turned, and there was Musk, standing behind him with a glass of wine in hand. The billionaire's eyes were locked on him, as though measuring him once more, his gaze intense but with a strange flicker of something Max couldn't quite place. "I'm glad you liked it," Max said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You didn't just make a meal," Musk replied, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You made a statement. That's what I admire. It's rare to see someone take such risks. And it paid off. People will talk about that dish for a long time." Max's pulse quickened. Musk was speaking directly to him now, his words sharp and deliberate. Max had expected some praise, but not like this. It felt like Musk was digging deeper, as though the approval wasn't just for the food, it was for something more. "But," Musk continued, his smile fading slightly, "you're still playing it safe. You've got the creativity, but I want to see you take things further. Push it. Really shock people. You've got the potential, Max, don't waste it. Max's heart thudded in his chest. There it was again, the challenge. Musk had already seen what Max could do, and now he was pushing him further, asking for more. Max had known it wouldn't be enough to simply impress Musk tonight, but this was a level he hadn't expected. Max felt a wave of heat rise in his chest. Was this a compliment? A critique? Or was it a warning? The words stung, but they also ignited something inside him, something deeper. Musk wasn't done with him. He had seen the potential in Max, and now, he wanted to see him push the boundaries even further. I hear you, Max said, his voice steady but with a fire burning beneath the surface. And I will. Musk's eyes narrowed, as though he was appraising Max's response. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Max standing there, his thoughts swirling. It was the kind of conversation that could change everything. For a moment, Max stood frozen, taking it all in. The validation. The challenge. The demand for more. It was the kind of moment that could break someone or propel them to greatness. But Max wasn't afraid. He had always thrived in the face of pressure, and this was just another layer of it. Another test. And he was ready for it. As the night finally came to an end, and the last of the guests began to filter out, Max felt an overwhelming sense of both accomplishment and uncertainty. The dinner had been a triumph, but the real test had only just begun. He had made it through the evening, but what came next? What was the next step in this journey? As he stood alone in the quiet, empty kitchen, staring at the dishes that had once been filled with food and now sat in silence, he realized something. This was only the beginning. Every success, every moment of triumph, would lead to the next challenge. And Max was determined to face it, to push himself even further. Because in this world, there was always room for more. The morning after the state dinner was a blur. Max awoke early, the events of the night still fresh in his mind, replaying in vivid detail. The applause, the tension, Musk's biting critique, and the unexpected approval. It had all been a whirlwind, and now, the silence of the early morning felt almost oppressive. Max moved through his apartment in a haze, a slight headache throbbing at the base of his skull. It wasn't from drinking, he hadn't touched a drop of alcohol the entire night. It was the pressure, always the pressure, that weighed him down. He had faced it for years, but somehow, last night had felt different. Musk's challenge still lingered in his mind like an open wound. Push further. Shock them. Don't waste your potential. Those words were branded into his thoughts. Max grabbed a cup of coffee and stepped out onto the balcony of his downtown apartment. The city stretched out in front of him, alive with the hum of early morning activity. People were going about their daily routines, unaware of the storm brewing inside his chest. For a moment, Max felt disconnected from the world around him, like a spectator in his own life. He had done something remarkable last night, but why did it feel like there was still something missing? Was he really pushing his limits? Was he truly satisfied with the path he had carved for himself? Max had always been good at what he did. He had built a reputation over the years as one of the best chefs in the industry, known for his creativity and ability to execute dishes with flawless precision. But had he really gone as far as he could? Or had he been hiding behind the safe choices, relying on his technical expertise rather than his true creative potential? The feeling of stagnation began to creep in, a gnawing sensation that no amount of coffee could shake. He had always been driven by the idea of making the perfect dish, but maybe that wasn't enough anymore. Maybe it was time for something more radical. He leaned against the railing, looking out at the city below. A thought popped into his head, maybe I've been afraid to fail. Max had always feared failure, not because he didn't believe in his abilities, but because failure meant exposing his vulnerabilities. For years, he had played it safe, taking calculated risks, but never going all in. Musk had seen that. And Musk had called him out for it. Max had learned a long time ago that the world wasn't kind to those who played it safe, no matter how good they were. He had worked hard to get to this point, but was it enough? What if his true potential lay on the other side of fear? His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Olivia. Olivia, hey, Max. I've been thinking about last night. You were incredible. I think we can take things even further, push the boundaries of what we're doing. Let's talk soon. Max's heart quickened. Olivia had been with him through thick and thin. She had been one of the first to see his potential, to push him to be better, even when he doubted himself. Her message was exactly what he needed to hear. She was on the same wavelength, ready to push the limits just as he was. Max quickly typed a reply. Max, let's meet at the restaurant at noon. We'll brainstorm some ideas. I think it's time we take things to the next level. He stared at his phone for a moment, wondering what this next phase would look like. The pressure would only grow from here, but for the first time, Max was ready to face it head-on. He wasn't just chasing success anymore, he was chasing something deeper. Something raw. Something real. At noon, Max arrived at the restaurant, where Olivia was already waiting for him in the kitchen. The air was thick with anticipation, and the team was buzzing around, preparing for the lunch service. But there was a palpable shift in the kitchen today, a sense of urgency that hadn't been there before. The restaurant was no longer just a place of routine. It was a space where they could push the boundaries, where they could dream big. Olivia met him at the door, her face bright with excitement. Ready to take this to the next level, she asked, her voice full of conviction. Max nodded. More than ready. They moved toward the center of the kitchen, where the team had gathered for their daily briefing. The staff was eager, ready to dive into whatever challenge Max would set before them. But Max wasn't focused on the typical lunch service today. He had something bigger in mind. He stood before them, feeling the weight of their expectations. Listen up, everyone, Max began, his voice steady but filled with purpose. Last night was incredible, but it was just the beginning. We've been playing it safe for too long, and I think it's time we take risks, real risks. We're not going to just create food anymore, we're going to create an experience. A conversation. A disruption. There was a pause in the kitchen, and Max could feel the tension building. The team was listening intently. Olivia's eyes sparkled with excitement, and Max could see the same energy in his sous chefs. They were ready to step into unknown territory with him. We're going to start experimenting, Max continued, and not just with the flavors, but with the very concept of dining. We're going to break the rules and then rewrite them. We'll make dishes that challenge expectations, that provoke thought, and maybe even shock people. But most importantly, we'll create something they'll never forget. The room was silent for a moment before Olivia broke into a grin. I'm in, she said, the rest of the team nodding in agreement. Max felt a surge of pride in that moment. It wasn't just about the food anymore, it was about creating something revolutionary. A new era of dining. The kind of food that didn't just feed people, it made them think, it made them feel, it made them experience life in a different way. As the team began brainstorming ideas, Max couldn't help but feel a new sense of excitement building inside him. There was a certain freedom in letting go of the safety net. The pressure would be immense, and failure was a very real possibility. But that's where the magic happened, he knew. It was in the fear, the uncertainty, and the courage to push through it. Max was no longer playing to impress. He was playing to change the game. Hours later, as the team began to experiment with new ideas in the kitchen, Max stepped back and watched with pride. It wasn't perfect yet, nothing worth doing ever was, but it was progress. They were making something that would go beyond just a meal. They were crafting a legacy. Max stood at the window of the kitchen, watching the sun set over the city. He had no idea what the future would hold, but one thing was certain, he was ready to face it. Whatever came next, Max would take it head-on, with no fear, no holding back. Because the best way to predict the future was to create it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Max threw himself into the new project with a singular focus. Every day, he and his team worked tirelessly to push the boundaries of what was possible in the culinary world. They tested new combinations of ingredients, played with presentation, and explored unconventional cooking techniques. It was a time of experimentation, of failing and succeeding in equal measure. But as much as Max was invigorated by the challenge, there was a growing sense of unease, like a storm cloud on the horizon that he couldn't shake. Every success, every breakthrough was immediately followed by the crushing weight of expectations. Musk's challenge had ignited something deep within him, but now, Max felt as if he was walking a tightrope, balancing on the edge of genius and disaster. The restaurant's atmosphere had shifted. The energy in the kitchen had always been high, but now, it was tense. The pressure of constantly innovating, of creating something fresh and groundbreaking, was starting to wear on everyone. There were moments of frustration, flavors that didn't work, dishes that fell flat, and long nights of reworking ideas that seemed like sure things just hours before. One evening, Max stood over a dish that was supposed to be the centerpiece of their upcoming tasting menu. It was a concept he had been developing for weeks, a combination of molecular gastronomy and traditional techniques, designed to challenge the diner's perception of food. But as he took the first bite, he knew instantly it wasn't right. It was bland. Flat. Lifeless. Frustrated, he slammed the plate down on the counter. "This is crap," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. The team had worked for days to perfect this dish, and here it was, a complete failure. Olivia walked over, sensing the tension in the room. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone gentle but concerned. Max looked at the dish and then back at her, his frustration palpable. "It's just not working. I thought I had it, but I don't. I can't seem to push it far enough. I'm trying to do something new, something that'll blow everyone away, but it feels like I'm losing myself in the process." Olivia studied him for a moment, and then placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're pushing yourself too hard. We all are. It's okay to fail, Max. We learn from it. But don't lose sight of why you started all this in the first place. You have the creativity, the vision. Just trust yourself." Max exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. She was right. The pressure was suffocating, and in his pursuit of greatness, he had begun to doubt himself. He had built an empire on pushing the limits of food, but somewhere along the way, he had lost the joy of creation. It wasn't just about shocking people anymore, it was about rediscovering why he fell in love with cooking in the first place. "I'll take a step back," Max said, his voice quieter now. "Maybe I need to reset my mind. Find that spark again." Olivia nodded. "Good idea. You don't have to do it all alone. We're in this together. We'll figure it out." Max spent the next few days trying to clear his head. He went to the farmer's market early one morning, not looking for specific ingredients but just letting his mind wander. He wanted to find something that would inspire him, something that would reignite his passion. As he walked between the stalls, the colors, smells, and textures began to stir something inside him. A sense of wonder he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't the flashy, avant-garde ingredients he was searching for, but the simple, raw beauty of the produce around him. The vivid red tomatoes, the earthy scent of fresh herbs, the delicate sweetness of peaches. It was all so familiar, so grounding. And then, as he picked up a few ripe figs from a vendor, it hit him. He didn't need to reinvent the wheel. He just needed to return to the basics. The true essence of food, the flavors, the textures, the memories. He had always believed that great food told a story. It didn't need to be complicated, it just needed to be authentic. And that authenticity would speak louder than any experimental technique ever could. By the time Max returned to the restaurant, his mind was made up. He was going to scrap the extravagant ideas and focus on something real. Something honest. He found Olivia in the kitchen, going over the prep for the evening service. "Olivia, I've got an idea," he said, a renewed energy in his voice. She turned to him, a curious smile spreading across her face. "I'm listening." Max walked over to the counter and began to describe his vision, a menu inspired by the simple, beautiful ingredients he had just seen at the market. The dishes wouldn't be groundbreaking in the sense of crazy techniques or unfamiliar combinations. Instead, they would focus on the purity of the ingredients, the natural flavors, and the connections between them. "We're going to tell the story of food," Max said, his excitement building. "We're going to remind people what food is really about. It's not about shock value, it's about memories, about comfort, about connection. And we're going to let those ingredients speak for themselves." Olivia's smile widened. "That sounds incredible." "You're right. We've been so focused on pushing the limits, we forgot what matters most. Let's do it." And so, the new challenge began. It was a step back, a return to the fundamentals, but in many ways, it felt like a giant leap forward. Max and Olivia worked side by side, crafting each dish with care and attention to detail. They focused on balance, honoring the natural flavors of their ingredients while creating experiences that would evoke emotion in every bite. But not everyone on the team was as enthusiastic about the change. Some of the younger chefs, who had been part of the more experimental phase, were hesitant. They were used to the fast-paced, boundary-pushing dishes they had been creating, and the idea of going back to basics felt like a step backward. But Max stood firm in his decision. This wasn't a regression, it was a recalibration. He wasn't abandoning innovation, he was finding a new way to innovate. As they prepared for the first service of the new menu, Max couldn't help but feel a sense of nervous excitement. This was a risk in its own right. He was no longer trying to impress with elaborate techniques, he was trying to move people with simplicity. And the fear of failure lingered, as always. But Max had learned something crucial, that fear wasn't something to avoid, it was something to embrace. It was the catalyst for growth. The first plates came out of the kitchen that evening, and as Max watched the guests take their first bites, he held his breath. Would they get it? Would they understand the depth of what he was trying to convey? As he watched the reactions of the diners. Smiles, nods of approval, moments of quiet reflection, Max felt a wave of relief. This was what he had been searching for. He had found his voice again, not through grand gestures, but through the purity of the food itself. And for the first time in weeks, Max felt at peace. The pressure, the fear, the constant chase for the next big thing, they had all faded into the background. What mattered now was the connection between the food and the people who tasted it. And that, he realized, was the truest form of innovation. As Max watched the service unfold, the restaurant seemed to hum with a new energy. The guests were responding to the new menu in ways he hadn't anticipated, more than just approval, they were moved. There was a sense of connection, a sense of nostalgia in the dishes that resonated with every bite. It wasn't just about eating, it was about feeling something deep within. But just as Max was beginning to find his rhythm again, the tension in the air thickened. It wasn't just the usual pressures of running a restaurant, something else was at play, something that made Max feel uneasy. The whispers began circulating after that first successful service. Whispers that spoke of a competitor who was quickly rising through the ranks, making waves in the culinary world. His name was Adrian Hale, a rising star in the culinary scene, known for his flair, his boldness, and his knack for pushing the boundaries of modern dining. Adrian had been invited to the state dinner as well, and his dishes had been praised for their innovative techniques. It was said that his menu had outshone everyone else's in the eyes of the critics. But it wasn't just the food that made him a topic of conversation, it was his personality. Adrian was known for his sharp tongue and his calculated confidence, which many saw as arrogance. His fans adored him, but his detractors found him insufferable. Max had heard about Adrian's rise, of course. He had followed the younger chef's career, albeit with a mix of admiration and wariness. But now, Adrian seemed to be everywhere, on the cover of culinary magazines, headlining exclusive events, and even hosting a television series that focused on elevating the art of dining. And that was the problem. Max had built his reputation on innovation, yes, but also on humility. He was never about fame or making headlines. But Adrian? Adrian was a showman, someone who thrived in the spotlight. And Max began to realize something that made him uncomfortable. Adrian's style was starting to influence the way people saw the culinary world. The expectation was shifting. People no longer just wanted great food, they wanted a performance, a spectacle. And Max knew deep down that his restaurant wasn't a place for spectacles. It was a place for real food, where diners could connect with the flavors, the memories, the ingredients. But there was a growing sense that his approach was becoming outdated, as if the culinary world was demanding something louder, more sensational. It was during one of his evening services that Max received an unexpected visitor. Olivia had just stepped into the kitchen, eyes wide with excitement, holding a message in her hand. "It's from Adrian Hale," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "He wants to meet with you." Max raised an eyebrow. "What does he want with me?" "I don't know, but he's apparently in town and heard about your new menu. He wants to talk. His people say it's urgent," Olivia added, handing him the message. Max stared at the note, his mind racing. What could Adrian possibly want from him? They weren't exactly friendly, and Adrian had never struck Max as the type to reach out personally. But curiosity gnawed at him. "All right. Set it up," Max said, trying to mask the growing tension in his chest. A few days later, Max found himself in a trendy cafe downtown, sitting across from Adrian Hale. Adrian's reputation preceded him, and despite Max's best efforts to remain composed, he could feel the weight of the encounter. Adrian's sharp eyes and confident smile were enough to make anyone uneasy, but Max wasn't about to show weakness. "Max, it's a pleasure," Adrian said, his voice smooth and polished. He extended his hand, which Max shook, though the gesture felt more like a challenge than a greeting. "The pleasure's mine, I suppose," Max said, leaning back in his chair. "What's this all about, Adrian?" Adrian smiled, taking a sip from his coffee before launching into his pitch. "I'm sure you've heard the buzz around my work. The critics love it. The people love it. But I've been thinking," he paused for effect, his eyes glinting, "there's a gap in the market. A void, if you will. We're both pushing the boundaries in our own ways, but what if we combined forces? You've got the technical precision, the artistry. I've got the flair, the media presence. Together, we could take the culinary world by storm." Max blinked, surprised by Adrian's directness. "You want us to partner up?" "Not exactly," Adrian replied with a smirk. "I'm offering you a chance to join me. I'm opening a new restaurant, a flagship project that will showcase the future of dining. I need someone who can deliver on the technical side, someone who understands ingredients the way you do. But this? This will be something bigger. A fusion of tradition and spectacle, a culinary revolution." Max felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't what he had expected. Adrian's offer was tempting, but it was also everything Max had built his career to avoid. It was about performance. It was about making headlines, not about the soul of food. "I don't know," Max said slowly. "That's not really my style. I don't want to be part of some spectacle. I'm more focused on creating something real, something meaningful." Adrian's smile didn't waver. "I get that. But think about it, Max. You've built your reputation on innovation, yes. But you've also been playing it safe. You've become comfortable. You're a legend in your own right, but your work, it's not pushing the envelope. You're starting to fade into the background. And when the world is looking for something fresh, something bold, you'll be left behind. This is your chance to step out of the shadows. Max's heart raced. Adrian's words stung more than he'd like to admit. Had he really become complacent? Was he losing his edge, his relevance? Adrian leaned forward, his gaze intense. I know you're capable of more, Max. But it won't happen staying in the comfort zone. Join me. We'll shake the world up. Max sat back, silence hanging between them. The offer was tempting, the challenge exhilarating. But Max knew that it wasn't just about food, it was about values. About staying true to himself. He had a decision to make. Would he risk everything to chase the allure of fame and recognition, or would he stay on the path he had always walked, focused on authenticity and substance? Adrian was right about one thing, change was coming. But Max wasn't sure if he was ready to give up everything he had worked for, everything he believed in, just to play in Adrian's game. Max spent the next few days in a daze. Adrian's offer lingered in his mind, playing over and over again. He couldn't deny that the idea of joining forces with someone like Adrian had a certain appeal. The fame, the global reach, the ability to create something that would truly shake the world of dining. But the more he thought about it, the more he felt a creeping sense of doubt. Was this what he truly wanted? Was this the path that would bring him fulfillment, or was it just another form of compromise? The restaurant was bustling as usual, but Max couldn't focus. The rhythm of the kitchen, the sizzling pans, the clattering of plates, it all felt distant, like he was watching it unfold from a different world. He had spent so many years building something real here, something that was about food, not the spotlight. He had created a place where people could experience the magic of a meal in its purest form, without all the flash and spectacle. But now, the world seemed to be shifting. And Max was unsure of his place in it. Olivia noticed the shift in his mood the moment he walked into the kitchen that morning. She'd known him long enough to recognize when something was off. "Max, you okay?" she asked, setting down her knife as she approached him. He didn't answer immediately, just stared at the cutting board in front of him, his mind far away. "Talk to me," Olivia urged, concern in her voice. "I can see something's bothering you." Max let out a heavy sigh and leaned back against the counter, his arms crossed. "I met with Adrian Hale," he said, voice tinged with frustration. "He wants me to join him. He's opening a new restaurant and thinks we can make a killing by combining his spectacle with my techniques." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Adrian Hale, huh? The guy with the TV show and all the hype. What did you say?" Max shook his head. "I don't know. I didn't say yes, but the offer, it's tempting. I mean, who wouldn't want to work with someone like him? He's changing the game. But it feels wrong. Like, I'd be giving up everything I've built. Everything that made this place special." Olivia studied him carefully before speaking. "Max, I get it. Adrian's flashy and all, but you've never been about the spotlight. You've always been about the food. So why does this feel different? Why does his offer feel like it's pulling at you?" Max frowned, running a hand through his hair. "Because I think maybe I'm stuck. I've been doing the same thing for so long. I've pushed boundaries, yeah, but maybe not enough. Maybe I'm not enough anymore. Adrian's right about one thing, things are changing, and I'm afraid of being left behind." Olivia's expression softened. "Max, you're not stuck. You've never been stuck. You've built this restaurant from the ground up, and you did it by staying true to yourself. You've never needed to follow the crowd, and you don't need to start now." Max stared at her, his gaze intense. "But what if I'm missing out? What if I'm not pushing hard enough? What if staying true to myself is just an excuse for playing it safe?" Olivia stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've always found a way to push the boundaries, Max. Just because your style isn't flashy like Adrian's doesn't mean it's any less impactful. It's not about outdoing someone else, it's about doing it your way. If you want to take a risk, then take it. But do it for the right reasons." Not because someone else says you have to. Max let out a breath, looking down at the countertop, his mind racing. He thought about the countless hours he'd spent in the kitchen, perfecting his craft. He thought about the way people responded to his food, the way a simple dish could bring someone to tears. It wasn't about the fame. It was about making an impact in people's lives, even if it was just for a fleeting moment. But then, that nagging voice crept back in. The voice that told him he had to evolve. The world was changing, and it wasn't going to wait for him to catch up. Adrian Hale was already ahead, leading the charge, while Max remained stuck in the past. Or was he? What do you think I should do? Max asked Olivia, the weight of the decision hanging heavy in the air. She smiled softly, her gaze unwavering. You're the only one who can answer that. What do you want your legacy to be? A flash in the pan, or something that stands the test of time? Max didn't have an answer. Not yet. But Olivia's words rang in his ears. A flash in the pan. That was the last thing he wanted to be. He didn't want to be remembered as a gimmick, a passing trend. He wanted his food to have meaning, to endure long after the latest culinary sensation faded away. But could he do that and still keep up with the changing times? Later that afternoon, as Max wandered through the local farmer's market, his mind was still tangled in the threads of uncertainty. He had been visiting the market for years, finding inspiration in the fresh, seasonal produce. Today, however, it felt different. The usual burst of creativity that filled him as he walked between the stalls was absent. His steps were slow, and his thoughts were preoccupied with Adrian's offer. Then, something caught his eye. A vendor had set out baskets of strawberries, small, vibrant, and bursting with color. Max couldn't resist. He picked up a punnet, inhaling the sweet aroma. He was immediately reminded of summer spent picking fruit with his mother when he was young. The taste of those strawberries was like a memory come alive, sweet, simple, and unforgettable. Max stood there, holding the punnet in his hands, and for the first time in days, a sense of clarity washed over him. He didn't need to become something he wasn't. He didn't need to chase the trends or the latest spectacle. The answer was right in front of him. It had always been about the ingredients, the memories, the simplicity of good food. Adrian could chase fame. Max would chase authenticity. It wasn't a choice between success and failure. It was a choice between two paths, two philosophies. He had always believed that the best food was born from the earth, crafted with love and care. He didn't need to be a part of Adrian's world to prove that. His food, his restaurant, they were more than enough. Max knew what he had to do. The decision was made. Max had resolved to stay true to his roots, to keep building his legacy, even if it meant stepping away from the flashy world Adrian was offering. He didn't need the bright lights or the cameras to prove he was good enough. What mattered most was the connection between the food and the people who ate it. That was where the real magic happened. The weeks that followed were filled with renewed focus and determination. Max returned to the kitchen with a fresh perspective. He revisited the dishes that had made his restaurant a beloved gem in the community, examining them with fresh eyes, looking for ways to elevate them without compromising their essence. It wasn't about adding more spectacle, it was about stripping away the unnecessary and letting the ingredients speak for themselves. But the world wasn't going to just let him walk away from the spotlight. Adrian's presence loomed large, a constant reminder of the path Max had turned down. The media was abuzz with news of Adrian's new project, a groundbreaking restaurant that promised to redefine the dining experience. The articles were glowing, the buzz was building, and Max could feel the pressure mounting. Then came the tipping point. One evening, Max was watching the news when he saw it. Adrian had publicly called him out. In an interview, Adrian had been asked about the growing tension between them, and he didn't hold back. Max is a great chef, don't get me wrong, Adrian had said with a smirk. But he's stuck in the past. He's clinging to this idea that food should be simple and humble. That's fine, but you can't stay relevant in today's world by making food that's stuck in another decade. People want excitement. People want something more. The word stung, but they didn't surprise Max. He had known this was coming. Adrian had always been quick to criticize anyone who didn't follow his lead, anyone who didn't buy into his philosophy of spectacle over substance. It wasn't about food for Adrian, it was about an image, an experience. Max's fingers gripped the edge of his kitchen counter as he stared at the screen, his mind racing. Adrian's words had a point, but they were also hollow. The world didn't need more distractions, more fluff. It needed more honesty, more connection. The moment passed, but Max's resolve only grew stronger. He couldn't let someone else define his journey, couldn't let someone else dictate what success looked like for him. His restaurant, his food, his legacy, it wasn't for sale. Max called a meeting with his team the next day. Olivia, Matteo, and the rest of the staff gathered in the back room, the weight of the upcoming conversation hanging in the air. They could sense the shift in Max's energy. He was different now, more focused, more determined. "I've made my decision," Max said, standing before them, his voice steady but charged with conviction. "I'm not going to partner with Adrian. I'm not going to chase the hype. We're going to double down on what we've always done here, creating food that's real, food that speaks to people's hearts." Olivia smiled, and Matteo nodded in agreement. They had seen Max go through the ups and downs, but they had never doubted his integrity. This was who he was. This was what they all believed in. "We're with you, Max," Olivia said, her voice filled with pride. "Always." Max looked around at his team, feeling a surge of gratitude. They weren't just employees, they were partners, they were family. Together, they had built something that was greater than the sum of its parts. And together, they would continue to build, brick by brick, dish by dish. "We're going to keep doing what we do best," Max continued. "We're going to focus on the flavors, on the ingredients. We're going to create dishes that are more than just food, they'll be experiences. But they'll be our experiences, not anyone else's." The team was fired up. They were ready to dive back into the grind, to push the boundaries of what was possible in the kitchen, but never at the expense of authenticity. The next few weeks saw a flurry of activity as Max and his team set their sights on revamping the menu. They worked tirelessly, testing new dishes, refining old ones, experimenting with new techniques, and pushing the boundaries of their craft. Max was no longer weighed down by doubt or comparison. He had found his purpose again, and it was clearer than ever. But the real test would come when the critics arrived. Max knew that he could continue to refine his dishes, continue to push for perfection. But the question remained, would they accept his vision? Would the food world embrace authenticity over spectacle? And then came the night of the big review. The critic from the most prestigious food magazine in the city was in the restaurant. Max had been through countless reviews before, but this one felt different. This one felt like everything was riding on it. As the critic moved through the restaurant, sampling each dish, Max stood at the pass, watching carefully. There was no room for mistakes tonight. He couldn't afford to second-guess himself. This was his moment to prove that he could succeed without sacrificing his values. When the critic finished the final dish, he stood up and nodded, signaling that the meal was over. He walked over to Max, a serious expression on his face. "I'll be honest, Max," the critic said, his voice low. "I came here expecting to see what everyone's been talking about. The innovation. The spectacle. But what I got tonight was something different. It was real. It was raw. It was honest." Max waited, heart pounding in his chest. "This meal," the critic continued, "was one of the best I've had in years. There's a depth to it, a soul. And that's what people want, whether they know it or not. It's not about the flash, the glamour, the show. It's about the food. And you've nailed it." Max's breath caught in his throat. He had done it. He had chosen the path less traveled, the one that honored his passion for food over the lure of fame. And in doing so, he had found something more rewarding than any critic's praise or media attention could ever give him. He had found peace in his work. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. Have you ever taken a leap of faith, knowing it was the right decision for you, even when the world was telling you otherwise? Max had always believed that good food could change the world, but after the glowing review from the critic, he realized just how far-reaching the impact of his choices could be. The review was published the following week, and the response was immediate. The restaurant was flooded with reservations, eager patrons who had read about the new wave of authenticity that Max was championing. What started as a small, quiet restaurant nestled in a neighborhood of food lovers had now become the center of attention. For the first time, Max was being recognized not because of his association with flashy trends or celebrity chefs, but because of the soul and depth of his food. People were coming not for the spectacle, but because they wanted something real, something they could connect with. But with the new attention came new challenges. The spotlight could be a double-edged sword, and Max knew it. He found himself juggling interviews, media requests, and visits from fellow chefs who wanted to know his secret. It was exhilarating, yes, but it was also exhausting. He had never craved fame, and now it was knocking at his door, demanding his time and energy. One afternoon, as he sat in his office surrounded by stacks of papers and half-empty coffee cups, his phone buzzed with another message from Adrian. Max hadn't heard from him since their last meeting, but Adrian's name still managed to pop up in the most unexpected places. "Max, I see the attention your restaurant's getting," the message began. "I've been thinking a lot about what we discussed. If you ever change your mind about joining forces, the offer's still on the table. We could make something huge. You just need to stop fighting the inevitable and take your place at the top of the food chain." Max stared at the screen, his fingers hovering over the keys. Adrian's words were tempting, no doubt. The promise of more visibility, more success, a larger platform, it was the dream that many chefs aspired to. But as he sat there, he felt a sense of discomfort settle in his stomach. The idea of selling out, of compromising what he had built just for the sake of fame, no longer felt like the right path. With a deep breath, Max typed out a response. "I'm good where I am, Adrian. Thanks, but no thanks." The response felt final. He hit send and immediately felt a sense of relief wash over him. It was a decision he knew he wouldn't regret. That evening, as Max made his way through the bustling kitchen, he noticed something that made his heart swell. A group of customers had gathered near the chef's counter, admiring the dishes as they came out of the kitchen. One of them was an elderly woman who caught Max's eye. She smiled warmly, her hands clasped in front of her. "You know," she said, her voice soft but filled with genuine appreciation, "I came here because I heard the food was good, but what I didn't expect was to be transported back to my childhood. This dish, it's just like what my grandmother used to make. The flavors, they're so familiar, so comforting. Thank you for this." Max's chest tightened with emotion as the woman continued to speak. Her words resonated deep within him. She wasn't just talking about food. She was talking about memories, about experiences that had shaped her life. And in that moment, Max understood more clearly than ever, this was what he had been striving for all along. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about fortune. It was about creating experiences that would stay with people, long after they left the restaurant. It was about forging connections, whether through a single dish or the atmosphere that surrounded them. As Max finished his shift and walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air, the weight of the past few weeks finally began to settle. His decision was reaffirmed, not through critics or media attention, but through the connection he had with his customers. He wasn't in this for the applause or the accolades. He was in it because he loved it, because he believed in the power of food to bring people together. A week later, the restaurant was featured in several major publications, both locally and internationally. The reviews kept pouring in, each one more glowing than the last. Max's philosophy of authenticity, simplicity, and soulfulness had struck a chord with so many, and his restaurant quickly became a place of pilgrimage for food lovers from all over. But even as the success piled up, Max remained grounded. He continued to cook with his team, continuing to refine his techniques and test new ideas. Every dish was still created with the same care and passion as it had been when he first opened his doors. The fame was nice, but the real satisfaction came from seeing his team thrive, from watching his customers experience the love he put into each plate. It was in those quiet moments, in between the clatter of pans and the hum of the kitchen, that Max felt at peace. He had made the right choice. He had chosen authenticity over spectacle, connection over fame, and in doing so, he had found something far more valuable than he had ever imagined. That evening, after another full night of service, Max and Olivia sat on the rooftop of the restaurant, looking out over the city. The stars were bright above them, and the lights of the city stretched out like a sea of tiny diamonds. "You did it, Max," Olivia said quietly, her voice filled with admiration. "You stuck to your guns, and look where it's gotten us." Max smiled, a tired but content smile. "It's not just me, Olivia. It's all of us. We've all worked so hard to get here. This restaurant, this team, it's more than I ever could have imagined." Olivia raised her glass. "To authenticity," she said, her eyes glinting in the light of the stars. "To authenticity," Max echoed, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace settle deep within him. The days following the critics' review were a whirlwind. Max's restaurant became the talk of the city. There were lines outside the door, waiting to taste the dishes that had been so praised in the press. The phone never stopped ringing, with inquiries for reservations, interviews, and collaborations from every corner of the culinary world. Max had always dreamed of recognition, but this was overwhelming. It was one thing to succeed in the quiet confines of a small, passionate community, but now he was dealing with attention on a scale he had never anticipated. It was exhilarating, but also exhausting. He could feel the pressure mounting on his shoulders with each passing day. Yet, amidst the excitement, Max began to notice something he hadn't expected. He was beginning to lose touch with the very thing that had made him passionate about cooking in the first place, the simple, unadorned joy of creating food for people he cared about. The long nights in the kitchen, the intimate moments of plating a dish with care, had slowly been replaced with meetings, events, and the constant hum of media buzz. There were moments when Max missed the days when it was just him and his team, experimenting, learning, and growing without the weight of external expectations. He missed the quiet moments when they cooked not for a crowd, but for the joy of the craft itself. Olivia had been by his side through it all, and she noticed the change in him before he did. One evening, after the restaurant had closed and they were tidying up, she spoke up. "Max, I've been watching you," she said, her voice soft but filled with concern. "You've been distant lately. Not just from the kitchen, but from the rest of us too. I get that everything is moving fast, but I don't want to lose sight of why we're doing this." Max sighed and leaned against the counter. He hadn't realized how much the constant hustle had started to take its toll on him. "I know. It's hard to keep up with all the expectations, all the noise. It's like I'm being pulled in a million directions." Olivia nodded, understanding. "I get it, Max. But you can't forget why you started this. You can't let the outside world decide what your restaurant is about. You built this place because you love the art of food. Don't let the pressure make you forget that." Max felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't realized how much he had been neglecting the soul of his work, the very thing that had made his restaurant special. He had become so focused on the recognition, the accolades, and the outside validation that he had forgotten the joy of cooking from the heart. "I've been so caught up in everything else," Max admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I just wanted to prove that we could be more than just a small restaurant, that we could make an impact on the food world. But now, I feel like I've lost the one thing that made me love this in the first place." Olivia placed a hand on his shoulder, offering silent support. Max, you've already proven that. You don't need anyone else's approval. You've got your team, your food, and your heart. That's what matters. The next few days were a turning point for Max. He took time to reflect on everything that had happened, the rise to fame, the praise from critics, the media frenzy, and he realized that he needed to make a change. He needed to return to his roots, to reconnect with what truly mattered. Max spent more time in the kitchen, not worrying about trends or how the dishes would be perceived, but focusing solely on the process of creating something beautiful. He worked closely with his team, rediscovering the joy of collaboration, experimenting with new ingredients and techniques in a way that felt fresh and exciting. No longer was he cooking to impress anyone. He was cooking because it brought him happiness, because it connected him to the people who tasted his food. And just as important, he started to spend more time with his customers, talking to them, getting to know them, and listening to their stories. Max had always believed that food was about connection, but he hadn't fully realized how much he had missed those intimate moments with the people who came through his doors. The constant hustle had made him forget the magic of a shared meal, the way food could bond strangers and turn a simple dinner into a moment of joy. As Max made these changes, the restaurant continued to thrive. But the difference now was that it felt more grounded. The pressure from the outside world had been replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Max's connection to his work, to his team, and to his customers was stronger than ever. One evening, as Max and Olivia sat on the same rooftop where they had talked months before, watching the city lights twinkle below them, Max felt a deep sense of contentment settle within him. He had learned that true success wasn't about fame, accolades, or recognition. It was about staying true to his values, his passions, and the people who had supported him along the way. "You were right, Olivia," Max said, his voice soft as he looked out over the city. "I've got everything I need right here. I don't need to chase after anything else." Olivia smiled, her eyes reflecting the glow of the city lights. "Sometimes, the hardest thing to do is realize that what you've got is already enough." Max nodded, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but he had come full circle. He had built something real, something that was bigger than just the food on the plate. It was about the people, the connections, the shared experiences. And that was worth more than any award, any review, any spotlight. As the night drew to a close and the restaurant settled into its quiet rhythm, Max knew that this was just the beginning. He didn't know where the road would take him next, but he was certain of one thing: it would be his road, paved with authenticity, passion, and the unwavering belief that food could change lives. For months, Max had found peace in the rhythms of his work, the slow, steady pulse of his restaurant. The pressure from the outside world seemed to have faded. He felt content. The reviews were still pouring in, but they didn't hold the same weight they once did. The only thing that truly mattered now was the food he created, and the connections he forged through it. But just when things seemed to be settling, the past knocked on his door in the form of an unexpected visitor, Adrian. Max had nearly forgotten about Adrian, the ambitious entrepreneur who had once offered him a chance to climb higher in the culinary world, at the expense of his authenticity. But here he was again, standing in the restaurant's foyer, wearing that same sharp suit and carrying the same air of self-assuredness. "Max," Adrian said, his voice smooth and polished, "I've been hearing great things about you. Your restaurant is everywhere. You've really made a name for yourself. I thought we should talk." Max stood frozen for a moment. He hadn't expected Adrian to show up, especially after the way their last conversation had ended. "What's this about, Adrian?" he asked, trying to mask his discomfort. "I'll be blunt," Adrian said, stepping forward, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. "I want to buy you out." Max's stomach dropped. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. "Buy me out?" "Exactly. I've been watching you grow. You've built something incredible, Max. But let's face it, you're limiting yourself. You've got a brand, a story that's captured the hearts of so many, and I can take it to the next level. Together, we could dominate the culinary scene, expand, open more locations, bring your food to the world. Max's mind raced. The offer was tempting, but he knew exactly what Adrian was proposing. It wasn't about passion or authenticity anymore, it was about business, about turning something beautiful into a machine. Max's gut twisted at the thought. "You know, I've already told you no before," Max replied, his voice firm but calm. "I'm not interested in selling out." Adrian's expression hardened slightly. "Max, I'm offering you a chance to change the world. You can continue doing what you love, but on a bigger stage. Think of the impact. Think of the people you could reach." Max's response was immediate, sharp. "What I love is doing what I do here. I don't need the world to know my name. I just need to know that when someone walks through that door, they're getting something real, something that comes from my heart. I won't compromise that." Adrian leaned back slightly, clearly not pleased, but he was undeterred. "You're stubborn, Max. I admire that. But don't say I didn't offer you a chance. I'll be around if you change your mind." And with that, he turned and walked out, leaving Max standing there, his heart racing. Later that evening, as Max stood behind the counter, his thoughts were a whirlwind. Adrian's offer wasn't just a business proposal, it was a challenge to everything Max had built. It was easy to get lost in the allure of growth, of expansion, of becoming more than just a small, beloved restaurant. But was it worth sacrificing the very essence of what he had created? His team had worked hard to bring this vision to life, and Max couldn't help but feel protective of them and their shared dream. Every dish they served, every customer they met, was part of something special, something that could not be replicated in a chain or a corporate empire. The thought of turning everything he had fought for into a business machine made him sick. Still, Adrian's words echoed in his mind, "Think of the impact. Think of the people you could reach." Max had always believed in the power of food to bring people together, to create connections, and to make a difference in people's lives. Could he do that on a larger scale? Could he take what he had built here and spread it to more people, without losing the heart of it? He didn't have an answer. But one thing was clear, Adrian's offer had thrown him into a spiral of doubt. It was the first real test of his resolve since opening his restaurant. What was he willing to sacrifice for success? And more importantly, what did success really mean to him? Max spent the next few days walking a fine line between excitement and anxiety. He continued to work with his team, preparing the same dishes he had always created, but his mind kept wandering back to Adrian. What if he was right? What if the next step in his journey wasn't about staying small, about staying safe? What if he was limiting himself? But no matter how hard he tried, Max couldn't shake the feeling that Adrian's vision was something that would fundamentally change who he was as a chef, and who his restaurant was. The pressure was mounting, and the conflict was becoming unbearable. Adrian's words about growth, fame, and potential success gnawed at him, but so did the thought of what he might lose, what he was willing to give up in exchange for more exposure and more recognition. As the days went on, Max's uncertainty grew. The noise outside the restaurant continued to intensify. Journalists, bloggers, food critics. They were all eager to talk to him, eager to know what the next chapter in his culinary journey would look like. But none of it felt right. None of it felt like his journey. In the quiet of the kitchen, Max found solace only in the familiar rhythm of chopping, stirring, and plating. But even that felt different now. The pressure to make the right decision was hanging over him like a cloud. The truth was, Max was afraid. Afraid of the choices ahead, afraid of what might happen if he followed Adrian's path, and afraid of what might happen if he didn't. That night, after the last customers had left and the kitchen had quieted, Olivia approached Max. She had seen the change in him too, the restlessness, the indecision. "Max, I know you're struggling with this," she said softly. "But you don't have to make this decision alone." Max looked at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. What if I'm making a mistake, Olivia? What if I'm too focused on staying true to my vision and missing out on something bigger? What if I'm too scared to take a chance? Olivia placed a hand on his arm. Max, whatever you choose, I'll be right here. But I know one thing for sure, you've built something beautiful here. Don't let anyone take that away from you, not even yourself. Max smiled faintly, her words grounding him in a way he hadn't expected. Olivia had always been his anchor, the steady presence that kept him from veering off course. He didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time in days, he felt a flicker of clarity. The decision wasn't about choosing fame over authenticity or success over integrity. It was about finding a way to navigate the tension between them, to hold on to what was important while still growing in the right direction. As he looked out into the quiet restaurant, Max realized that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. But he wasn't going to give up without a fight. The next few days passed in a blur. Max spent hours in the kitchen, working through the menu with his team, trying to focus on what he loved most, creating beautiful dishes, feeling the rhythm of the kitchen, and serving customers who left with smiles and satisfied stomachs. But even in the midst of the culinary madness, the question kept haunting him, should he sell out? Adrian's offer loomed large in his mind. The chance to expand, to become a household name, was seductive. The idea of growing beyond his little restaurant, reaching more people, and having an even bigger impact on the culinary world was tempting, but at what cost? The world of business and mass production clashed with the ideals he had spent years building, a place where food was about the craft, the people, the heart. Max could feel the pressure building, both external and internal. His team was counting on him to make the right decision. His customers expected excellence, but they also wanted something real, something they could connect with. His relationship with Olivia had been steadily growing stronger, yet now it felt like there was an invisible wall between them, built from the uncertainty and doubt he was carrying around. Max, Olivia said one evening after service, the tension in her voice unmistakable, what's going on? You've been distant lately. You don't seem like yourself. Max paused, looking down at the countertop, trying to gather his thoughts. The decision weighed heavily on him, and it was clear that it was affecting his ability to focus on anything else. I'm just trying to figure out what's next, he said quietly. Adrian came back with a business offer. He wants to buy me out, wants to take the restaurant to the next level. But I don't know if that's the right thing to do. Olivia sat down across from him, her gaze steady and unwavering. You've always been so sure about this place, Max. You built this restaurant with your own two hands, with your heart and soul. It's not just a business. It's you. But now you're being offered something bigger, something that could change everything. Max's hands clenched into fists. That's the problem. It's not just about growing anymore. It's about changing who we are. Adrian wants to turn this into a brand, a machine. I don't know if I can live with that. Olivia leaned forward, her expression softening. You don't have to make a decision right away. But whatever you choose, just remember what got you here. Remember why you started this. And remember that we're all in this together. Max's heart ached as he looked at Olivia. She was right, of course. The restaurant wasn't just about him. It was about all of them, the team that had worked tirelessly beside him, the people who believed in the food and the story. But the pressure to make the right choice was eating away at him. The next day, Max took a long walk around the city, needing some space to think. The streets, which had once felt familiar and comforting, now seemed overwhelming, filled with the noise of the world. It was as if everything and everyone was telling him to take the next step, to expand, to grow. But as he walked, something shifted. He stopped in front of a small bakery, a place that had always been one of his favorites. The owner, a grizzled old man who had been baking bread for decades, waved at him from inside. Max smiled and waved back. Inside, the smell of freshly baked goods filled the air. The baker greeted him warmly, and they exchanged a few words. As Max sat at the counter with a steaming cup of coffee, he looked around. The bakery was simple, small, with no frills. Yet, there was something so incredibly genuine about it. It wasn't flashy or trendy. It didn't have a massive social media following or a celebrity endorsement. But it was perfect. It was real. The baker, noticing Max's gaze, chuckled softly. "Been doing this a long time, my friend. Never wanted to be the biggest. I just wanted to make people smile with a good loaf of bread." The word struck Max hard. He had spent so much time chasing success, trying to measure up to some idea of what greatness looked like. But maybe the true measure of success wasn't in size or fame. Maybe it was in the impact he had on the people who walked through his door, in the joy his food brought to their lives. Max left the bakery with a sense of calm he hadn't felt in days. As he made his way back to the restaurant, he knew what he had to do. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy, and it certainly wouldn't guarantee him fame or fortune. But it would be true to himself, true to the reasons he started this journey in the first place. He walked through the restaurant doors, where his team was already preparing for the evening service. They looked up as he entered, waiting for him to speak. "I've made a decision," Max said, his voice steady. "We're going to stay true to what we are. No matter what. I'm not going to sell out. We're going to keep growing, but we're going to do it on our own terms." There was a collective sigh of relief from his team. Olivia walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes filled with pride. "That's what I've been waiting to hear," she said quietly. Max smiled at her, grateful for her unwavering support. "I've realized that the only way to make an impact is by staying true to who we are. We've built something real here, and that's worth more than anything else." That night, as the restaurant filled with the familiar hum of conversation and the clink of silverware, Max stood at the pass, watching his team work in harmony. He felt the old thrill of the kitchen, the joy of creating something from nothing, of sharing his passion with those who truly appreciated it. The decision had been made, but the journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt. But Max was no longer afraid of what the future held. He had found his path, and that path was one of authenticity, of purpose, and of the people who mattered most. The ones who walked through the door, hungry not just for food, but for something real. And as he looked out at the customers enjoying their meals, Max knew that the impact he longed to make wasn't about size, fame, or fortune. It was about connection. It was about staying true to himself and his team, no matter where the journey led. Max awoke the next morning to the soft hum of the city just beginning to stir. His decision the night before had brought him a sense of clarity, but there was still an underlying tension, a storm brewing that he could not ignore. He had chosen the path of authenticity, the path that was true to himself and to his team, but that didn't mean the road ahead would be smooth. The restaurant was busier than usual that morning. Word had spread fast about the decision Max had made, to reject Adrian's offer and keep the restaurant independent. The social media buzz, the food blogs, the whispers around town, they were all reacting to the news. The opinions were mixed, some praising Max for sticking to his guns, while others questioned his refusal to grow. Max couldn't escape the tension in the air. Even though he had made peace with his choice, the constant pressure of outside expectations was weighing heavily on him. People wanted more from him. They wanted him to be something bigger, something more. But he wasn't sure he was ready to bear the weight of it all. The tension was palpable as Max entered the kitchen, ready to take on another service. He had made his decision, but it was still difficult to shake the doubts. What if he had made a mistake? What if he had just set himself up for failure? Olivia noticed his unease as soon as he walked through the door. She knew him well enough to see that something was off, even if he wasn't saying it aloud. "You okay?" she asked, her voice quiet, concerned. Max hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I'm fine. Just thinking." "About Adrian?" she asked gently. Max nodded. "I can't shake the feeling that I might have made a huge mistake. What if this decision puts all of us at risk? Olivia moved closer, standing beside him as he stared out into the kitchen. Max, I've seen you grow. I've seen you fight for this. You didn't build this place for the fame or the fortune. You built it because you believed in something. Don't let anyone, especially Adrian, make you question that. You've built something real. And that's worth fighting for. Max let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging slightly. He had always admired Olivia's unwavering belief in him. It was one of the things that kept him going. But the outside world, Adrian's offer, the pressure to expand, kept tugging at him. The kitchen was alive with energy, the rhythm of chopping, stirring, and plating. Max tried to focus, but the thoughts wouldn't stop swirling. He needed to make sure his team knew they were in this together. They needed his leadership now more than ever. As the night wore on and the restaurant filled with customers, the pressure seemed to mount even more. The noise of conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the sizzling of food in the kitchen created a whirlwind of activity. But through it all, Max remained focused on what he could control, the quality of the food and the experience they created for their customers. Everything was moving like clockwork, until the unthinkable happened. A VIP guest had arrived, none other than a prominent food critic, one whose reviews could make or break a restaurant. Max had known this critic's reputation, and he had hoped that their little slice of culinary heaven would impress. But just as the critic took the first bite of their signature dish, a dish Max had personally perfected over the years, something went wrong. The critic's face remained neutral at first, but then, Max saw it, the subtle cringe. It was enough to send a chill down his spine. He walked over to the table, trying to mask his anxiety. "Is everything to your liking?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. The critic looked up at him, not missing a beat. "The flavors are off," the critic said simply. "It's not quite what I expected from someone with your reputation." Max's heart sank. This was the moment he feared. The moment everything he had worked for could crumble in an instant. After the critic left, Max stood in the middle of the kitchen, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. His mind was racing. What went wrong? He thought. How could I have missed it? Olivia found him standing there, staring into space. "Max," she said gently, "we'll fix it. It's just one bad review. We've faced worse." Max turned to her, his face taut with frustration. "This wasn't just one bad review, Olivia. This critic has the power to destroy us. One word from them, and we're done. I don't know if I can keep going like this." Olivia didn't flinch. "Max, you know what this restaurant means. You know what we're fighting for. This critic doesn't define us. We define us. Don't let one setback convince you that everything's over." But Max was struggling. This wasn't just about one bad review. It was about everything, the weight of the world pressing down on him, the doubts, the fear of failure. For the first time, he questioned everything he had built. Was it enough? Had he made the wrong choice by rejecting Adrian's offer? The next morning, as the sun rose over the city, Max woke up to a slew of notifications on his phone. The review had gone live, and the internet was buzzing. The comments were mixed. Some agreed with the critic's assessment, while others defended Max and his restaurant, pointing out that everyone had off days. But the noise, the constant pressure, it was too much to handle. He sat at his kitchen table, staring blankly at the screen in front of him. For the first time, the weight of the decision to stay independent felt heavier than ever. But then, he remembered the words of the baker he had met. "I just wanted to make people smile with a good loaf of bread." That simple, pure sentiment hit Max like a wave. He had never set out to be the biggest. He had set out to do something real, something that mattered. The pressure, the critics, the outside expectations, none of it had ever been about those things. It had always been about the food, the people, the connections. As the sun began to rise higher in the sky, Max stood up, a renewed sense of clarity taking hold of him. It wasn't about pleasing everyone or winning every battle. It was about staying true to what mattered most, his craft, his team, and the people who believed in what they were doing. The storm would pass. It always did. Max walked into the restaurant that morning, and for the first time in days, he felt at peace. The decision hadn't been easy, and there would be more challenges ahead. But he was ready. With his team by his side and the belief that what he was doing mattered, Max knew that no matter how tough things got, he was in this for the long haul. Max stood in the kitchen, hands on his hips, staring at the hustle and bustle around him. The atmosphere had changed overnight. The restaurant was filled with customers, many familiar faces, but more and more strangers were filling the tables. Word had spread that the food critics' review hadn't been as disastrous as expected, and the small storm that had rocked Max's world was beginning to calm. But despite the relief that came with the shift, Max couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. The weight of the decision to stay independent, to reject the lure of easy success, was still on his shoulders. It wasn't just about the food anymore. The pressure had multiplied. Max turned to Olivia, who was coordinating the front of house with her usual calm demeanor. He caught her eye and gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. They both knew the gravity of the situation. They had survived the night. But it was only one battle in what would surely be a long war. Olivia came over to him, her smile easing the tension in his chest. "We're still standing, Max. That's a win." Max took a deep breath. "But for how long?" She raised an eyebrow. "Don't start doubting now. You've always believed in this place. You built it from the ground up. One setback isn't the end." Max nodded, but doubt lingered in the back of his mind. As successful as they had been, the world outside their restaurant was relentless. Adrian's offer had always been more than just a business deal, it was a promise of safety. The security of money, of expansion, of recognition. Now, he had nothing to fall back on except the strength of his own vision. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that vision was worth fighting for. The critics' words had stung, but they didn't define him. He would take the feedback, improve, and move forward. After all, this wasn't just about one review, it was about building something real, something lasting. Over the next few weeks, Max dove headfirst into the work. There was no time to linger in uncertainty. Every dish was an opportunity to prove something, not just to the critics or the customers, but to himself. Every challenge that arose, every mistake made, was a chance to learn and grow. The menu evolved. The team worked tirelessly to improve the restaurant's offerings, responding to the critics' review with an energy that hadn't been present before. They weren't trying to replicate success, they were creating something even more unique, something that was undeniably their own. Max found himself spending more time in the kitchen, experimenting with new ideas. He had always loved the artistry of cooking, but now, it felt like there was a new layer of purpose behind each dish. He wasn't just cooking for the sake of cooking. He was cooking for the future, his future, the restaurant's future, and the future of his team. One afternoon, while reviewing orders and ingredients with his sous chef, Rachel, Max felt a shift. The tension he had been carrying seemed to dissipate, replaced by something more tangible, hope. "We're ready," Rachel said as she adjusted her apron, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "This menu's going to blow people away." Max smiled, the first real smile he'd had in days. "Let's do it, then. We're not just going to survive. We're going to thrive." As the days passed, the winds of change began to blow in the restaurant's favor. The reviews, while still mixed, were becoming more positive. Max's decision to stay independent resonated with more people than he had anticipated. The authenticity that had made the restaurant special was now being recognized by a broader audience. It wasn't about mass appeal or catering to trends. It was about something deeper, a connection to the food, the people, and the philosophy behind it all. Then, one evening, just as the restaurant was about to close for the night, the phone rang. Max was surprised to see it was a call from none other than Adrian. His pulse quickened. He hadn't spoken to Adrian since their last meeting, and he had no idea what this call could mean. Max answered the phone, trying to keep his voice steady. "Adrian." "Max," Adrian's voice came through, smooth and confident as ever. "I've been watching the buzz around your place. You've got a lot of people talking. I have to admit, I didn't think you'd pull it off." Max didn't know how to respond. He hadn't expected to hear those words. "I'm still here, Adrian. The restaurant's still standing." "I see that. And I'm not going to lie, it's impressive. But here's the thing, Max. You've built something great. But there's always room for more. You could be bigger. You could reach more people. My offer still stands." Max paused. He had known this was coming. Adrian wasn't going to let go so easily. "I've made my choice, Adrian. I'm not interested in selling. Not now, not ever." There was a brief silence on the other end. When Adrian spoke again, his tone had changed. It was no longer the smooth, persuasive voice that had once tempted Max. Instead, there was something more measured, almost resigned. "You know, Max," Adrian said, his voice quieter, "I've seen a lot of chefs come and go. Most of them chase the dream of becoming bigger, of becoming something more. But the real question is, what's more? What's the point of growth if you lose what made you great in the first place?" Max felt a flicker of something inside him. Was it doubt, or understanding? He couldn't quite tell. "I don't know, Adrian," Max said after a long pause. "I'm still figuring that out. But I do know one thing. I can't lose who I am in the process." The silence stretched on, longer this time. Then, Adrian spoke, his voice softer. "I respect that, Max. I really do. Just know that if you ever change your mind, my offer is still on the table." Max exhaled, the weight of the conversation settling into his chest. "Thanks, but no thanks." As he hung up the phone, he felt a strange sense of finality. The decision had been made. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Max was at peace with that uncertainty. The restaurant had survived. And it would continue to survive, not because of the fame or the fortune, but because of the heart and soul behind every dish. Max had chosen authenticity over expansion, purpose over profit. And somehow, he knew that choice would make all the difference. Max sat in the quiet of his office, the evening calm settling over the restaurant like a blanket. The dinner rush was over, and the team was winding down, cleaning up the last of the plates and dishes. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind, and the weight of the decisions he had made, both for the restaurant and himself, was beginning to feel more manageable. He wasn't sure if he could say he was at peace, but he had come a long way from the man who had been drowning in uncertainty just a few months ago. But it wasn't over yet. The road ahead was long, and the challenges that lay ahead were still real. Max rubbed his temples, feeling the pressure begin to build again. Though the worst of the storm had passed, it was clear to him that there was no such thing as a simple resolution. The world would keep moving forward, and so would he, one step at a time. As the days stretched into weeks, the restaurant had slowly but surely regained its footing. The Food Critics Review had made a ripple, but not a fatal one. The diner's reputation was still intact. More importantly, Max had rediscovered the joy in cooking, the joy that had been buried under the weight of external pressures. He had put his heart back into the dishes, each one a reflection of his passion, his purpose, his identity as a chef. Yet, even with all the small victories, Max couldn't help but wonder about the bigger picture. Was he content with where he was now, or was there more to strive for? It was a crisp Saturday morning when Max received a letter that would change everything. The envelope was sleek and formal, a stark contrast to the handwritten notes he typically received from loyal customers or suppliers. He had no idea what was inside, but as he sliced open the seal, his fingers trembled slightly. Inside was a letter from one of the top restaurant associations in the country. The kind of prestigious organization that only recognized the very best of the culinary world. And to Max's astonishment, the letter was an invitation to apply for a prestigious award, Best New Independent Restaurant of the Year. Max sat there for a moment, staring at the letter as if it were a piece of foreign text. It felt surreal. The restaurant had been open for several years now, but the idea that it was being recognized in this way, this officially, seemed almost too much to grasp. He ran his hand over his face, trying to process what this meant. An award like that would elevate the restaurant. It would put them on the map. They'd finally receive the kind of recognition that could change everything. The lines of customers that were beginning to fill the dining room could become even longer. The reputation could snowball. And with that reputation came the temptation to expand, to grow even faster than they were already going. But there was another side to the coin. An award of this caliber would attract more eyes, and those eyes might come with their own set of expectations. The critics. The investors. The business side of the restaurant. The lure of capitalizing on success. The temptation to become what he had rejected only months ago. Max leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a brief moment. The road ahead wasn't as clear as it had been when he made the decision to stay independent. There were now more paths, more choices. More distractions. A soft knock on the door broke his train of thought, and Olivia stepped in. She was always the first to sense when something was off with him. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice gentle but inquisitive. Max held up the letter without saying a word. She took it from his hands and read the contents aloud. An invitation to apply for Best New Independent Restaurant of the Year. She raised an eyebrow, a smile playing at the corner of her lips. "This is big, Max, really big." Max nodded slowly. "I don't know what to make of it. It feels like a test. A reminder that we could take the easy road. But we've worked so hard to be different. To stay true to what we are." Olivia sat across from him, folding her arms. "It's not about the award, Max. It's about what the award means to you. The restaurant is your legacy. Do you want it to be something bigger, or do you want it to stay exactly as it is?" Max thought for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. There was no denying that the invitation was a chance for them to prove themselves on a larger stage. But was that what they needed? What if we keep it small? Keep it true? Max asked, almost to himself. What if we focus on what matters most and never lose sight of that, no matter how much success we get? Olivia nodded. Then we keep doing what we've always done. We keep pushing the boundaries of what we can create without losing the soul of what makes us different. Max's mind was spinning, but Olivia's unwavering faith in their mission was something he hadn't realized he needed until now. He had always been the one making decisions, leading the team, but in this moment, it felt as if the team was leading him. It wasn't about awards. It wasn't about recognition. It was about making something real, something that would stand the test of time, no matter how big or small it became. The decision didn't come immediately. Max spent days weighing the options, talking to Olivia, and consulting with the rest of his team. They all had their own opinions, their own hopes for the future, but in the end, it came down to one thing: authenticity. What did the restaurant stand for? What did they want it to represent? And when the decision was finally made, it was clear. They would apply. They would apply, not because they needed the recognition, but because they wanted to prove that their story was worth telling. They would let the world know that it was possible to build something meaningful, something lasting, and do it on their own terms. The application process was grueling, and it took weeks to compile everything they needed: the restaurant story, the details of their culinary journey, and the unique approach that set them apart. But when the final submission was sent off, it felt like a weight had been lifted. They had done everything they could, and now, they would simply wait. Max stood on the restaurant's rooftop, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The city stretched out before him, full of possibilities. For the first time in a long time, he felt ready. Ready to face whatever came next, ready to face the unknown. He had made peace with the fact that no path was without its struggles. But he was no longer afraid of the challenges ahead. He had found his true purpose, and that was enough. The winds of change would always be blowing, but Max had learned how to navigate them. And wherever they took him, he would follow, with heart, with integrity, and with the knowledge that what he was building was worth more than any award or accolade could ever provide. The invitation had been sent. The application had been completed. Now, all that remained was to wait. The calm that followed was deceptive. It felt like the quiet before the storm, a lull that Max couldn't shake. Though the restaurant had found its footing again, there was a lingering tension, an undercurrent of something just beneath the surface. Max couldn't stop thinking about Adrian's words from the other night. You could be bigger. Was it something that still haunted him? Or was it the growing pressure of the industry? Either way, Max couldn't ignore the rising conflict that was starting to build in him. He had made peace with his decision, but that peace felt fragile now that new forces, both within and outside the restaurant, were beginning to stir. The next few weeks unfolded with a new rhythm. The kitchen was busier than ever, with the rush of customers continuing to flow in. It was exhilarating, exhausting, and strangely satisfying. Every night, the team worked tirelessly, pushing themselves to refine their craft. Yet, Max could feel it, a slight shift. The energy in the kitchen had changed. Tensions that had been dormant were beginning to surface. Rachel had been quieter than usual. Max noticed that her once boundless energy seemed reserved, almost hesitant. She was still executing her work with precision, but her enthusiasm for the job had dimmed. He chalked it up to the stress of the past few weeks, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more. One evening, as Max prepared for service, he caught Rachel in the back corner of the kitchen, her face in her hands, taking deep breaths. He hesitated for a moment before walking over to her. "Rachel," Max said, his voice softer than usual. "Everything okay?" She looked up, a forced smile crossing her face. "Yeah, it's been a long week." Max didn't buy it. "Talk to me." She exhaled deeply. I don't know if I'm cut out for this anymore, Max. It's not about the work. The work is fine. But I don't know. I feel like there's something missing." Max frowned. "Rachel, you're one of the best chefs I've ever worked with. If you're feeling lost, then what does that mean for the rest of us?" Rachel's gaze flickered away. "That's just it. I don't feel like I belong here anymore. I thought I did, but I can't help but feel like maybe I'm chasing something that doesn't even exist." Max's heart sank. He had always relied on Rachel's steady presence, her dedication to the craft. The idea that she was considering leaving felt like a punch to the gut. "Rachel, listen to me," Max said gently, "we've been through so much together. This place wouldn't be what it is without you. And whatever it is that's bothering you, we'll work through it. You're not alone in this." Rachel hesitated, the tension in her posture betraying her uncertainty. "I don't know if I can keep up, Max. The restaurant's growing, and we're facing bigger challenges. I thought I was ready for it, but now I don't know anymore." Max could see the weight she was carrying. It wasn't just the work or the pressure, it was something deeper, something that she hadn't fully acknowledged. "You don't have to face this alone," Max repeated, his voice firm with conviction. "We're a team, and that means we face the good and the bad together. Whatever you need, I'm here for you." She met his gaze for a moment, and for the first time in weeks, Max saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Thanks, Max. I don't want to give up." I just need to figure out where I'm headed. Max gave her a reassuring nod. Take your time. You don't have to have all the answers right now. But don't walk away from this place. You've helped build it. Rachel didn't respond immediately, but she seemed to find some comfort in his words. As they stood there, Max realized that their problems weren't just external, they were internal as well. He had put all his energy into keeping the restaurant alive, into facing the pressures that had been thrust upon him. But what about the team? What about the people who made the restaurant run? Was he doing enough to support them? Had he become so focused on his own struggles that he had overlooked the ones right in front of him? As the weeks passed, Max became increasingly aware of the growing divide in the kitchen. It wasn't just Rachel. Small tensions were bubbling up between other members of the team as well. The constant pressure to perform, to succeed, to maintain their hard-won reputation, Max could see that it was taking its toll on everyone. There was a sharpness in their voices, a fatigue in their movements. It was as if the weight of their shared success was starting to break them apart instead of bringing them closer together. And then there was Olivia. She had been his rock throughout this whole journey. The person who kept him grounded when everything around him felt like it was shifting. But even she was beginning to show signs of strain. Her usual calm demeanor was starting to fray around the edges. He caught her late one night, after closing, staring out the window at the city lights, deep in thought. "What's on your mind?" Max asked, walking over to her. Olivia didn't immediately answer, as if she were still processing something. When she did speak, her voice was quieter than usual. "I'm worried about the direction we're headed, Max. You've worked so hard to make this place a success. But I'm starting to wonder if we're losing the essence of what we set out to create. We've become so focused on being the best, we're forgetting why we started this in the first place." Max felt a weight settle in his chest. Olivia's words were hitting a nerve he hadn't fully acknowledged. "I know what you mean," Max admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I've been so focused on the restaurant's future, I've neglected what matters right now. The team. The people who got us here. It's like we're on a treadmill, constantly moving, but never getting anywhere." Olivia turned to face him, her expression soft but resolute. "It's not too late to change that. We need to recalibrate. We need to focus on what's truly important before we lose sight of it." Max nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink in. It wasn't just the external forces that were threatening to pull them under, it was the internal ones. The growing pressure, the stress, the sense of loss that each person was feeling. If they didn't address these things, the restaurant wouldn't survive, no matter how successful it became. "We'll fix it," Max said, his voice more determined than ever. "I'll fix it. We'll get back to our roots and remember why we do this. For the food. For the people. For each other." It started with a sizzle. Then a sharp shout. And suddenly, chaos. Max had only turned his back for a second when it happened. The fryer had overflowed, and flames had erupted along the kitchen's stainless steel backsplash. The smoke alarm was screaming, pots clattered to the floor, and someone yelled for the fire extinguisher. "Back! Everyone back!" Max shouted, grabbing the extinguisher from the wall. Rachel was already there, dousing the flames with a blanket as Max released the powder in bursts, cutting through the smoke like fog lights in a storm. By the time the fire was out, the kitchen was a disaster zone. Burnt oil covered the floor, and smoke was still curling along the ceiling. But no one was hurt. That was the only blessing. For a moment, no one moved. The air hung heavy with adrenaline and burnt grease. Max's heart was pounding in his ears. He looked at the team, Rachel, arms streaked with ash, Luis, staring in stunned silence, Olivia, rushing in from the front with wide eyes. Then came the silence. "Shut it down," Max said quietly. It was the first time in years they had closed mid-service. Word spread quickly, customers told to leave, plates half-served, drinks untouched. Some complained. Some left quietly. But Max didn't care. That fire wasn't just a freak accident. It was a symptom of stress, of burnout, of a team stretched too thin. They had been chasing perfection, chasing reputation, chasing survival. And now the cracks were finally showing. Later that night, the kitchen was eerily quiet. Most of the crew had gone home, too shaken or embarrassed to say much. Only Olivia, Rachel, and Max remained, standing in the wreckage. This was bound to happen, Olivia said flatly, running a towel through her hair. Everyone's been running on fumes. Max leaned against the prep counter, his head in his hands. I should have seen it coming. I pushed too hard. No, Rachel said softly. We all pushed too hard. We were trying to prove something. Max looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the exhaustion in her face. But also something else. Regret. I thought maybe we could hold it all together, she continued. But the truth is, we lost sight of each other. Max nodded slowly. I've been treating this restaurant like a lifeboat. Like if I just rowed hard enough, we could make it to shore. But I forgot to check if everyone else could even swim. Olivia came closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. You can still fix this. But you need to stop carrying all of it alone. Let people in, Max. Let us in. It was a moment that cracked something open in him. Not just guilt, not just stress, but vulnerability. The need to be seen, not as a chef, not as a leader, but as a person struggling to hold on. The next day, Max called a team meeting. No aprons. No prep lists. Just everyone, front and back of house, sitting together in the dining room. He stood in front of them, nervous, unshaven, raw. I know last night was terrifying, he began. And I need to take responsibility for that. I've been driving this place like we're on a racetrack. I didn't slow down to ask how you were all doing. I didn't stop to see the warning signs. I'm sorry. The room was silent, but everyone was listening. We've built something amazing together, Max continued. But somewhere along the way, we forgot why we started. I want to bring that back. Not just for me, but for all of you. This isn't just a kitchen. It's a home. And homes take care of their people. Rachel was the first to speak. I thought I was going to quit last week. I didn't because I felt like I'd be letting everyone down. But now, I think we all just needed this moment. Luis added, I was scared too. Scared of failing. Scared of slowing down. But I missed the way we used to cook, together. Not like machines. Voices chimed in, quiet at first, then stronger. Stories of stress. Of missed birthdays. Of sleepless nights. But also of pride. Of belief in what they had built. They weren't just employees, they were part of something bigger. Max took a deep breath. So here's what we're doing. We're cutting hours. We're rotating weekends. And we're adding a family meal every Friday night. No service. Just us. We break bread together. Like it used to be. There were murmurs of surprise, then relief, then applause. For the first time in a long time, the team felt like a family again. That night, Max stayed late scrubbing the fryer himself. Olivia joined him, drying the cleaned parts beside him. You're changing, she said, watching him. Yeah, Max replied, not looking up. It took a fire to see it. She smiled faintly. Sometimes, it takes burning down a wall to find the light behind it. Max paused and looked around the kitchen. Scorched, scarred, imperfect. But alive. This place almost broke me, he said quietly. But I think it's starting to rebuild me too. 3 weeks after the fire, the restaurant reopened for full service, and it felt different. Not because the lights were brighter or the plates were fancier. Not even because the critics were back to sniffing around after whispers of the upcoming national award. No, it felt different because the people inside were different. The wounds from that chaotic night hadn't disappeared. But something had shifted. The tension had loosened. The walls had come down. And in their place was something even stronger. Trust. Max could see it in the way Rachel laughed again as she plated her pasta with flair. In how Louise cracked jokes on the line. In how Olivia moved through the front of house with a new kind of ease, like she wasn't holding her breath for everything to fall apart anymore. For the first time in months, the kitchen felt like it was breathing again. And Max. Max finally felt like he could breathe too. On a Thursday morning, Max arrived early. The restaurant was still quiet, golden sunlight bleeding through the tall windows. He stood by the counter, sipping burnt coffee from an old mug, staring at the empty tables. The award ceremony was only a week away. The email had come the night before, they were finalists. One of 5 restaurants in the running for Best New Independent Restaurant in America. His phone buzzed with congratulations from other chefs, old colleagues, even Adrian. Yes, that Adrian. The man who once tried to buy him out had texted, "Told you you had something special. Don't blow it." Typical. Max stared at the tables, imagining them filled, the laughter, the clinking of forks, the hum of conversation. That was success. Not press. Not stars. Just connection. He walked into the kitchen. Clean. Prepped. Calm. And taped on the fridge door, next to Rachel's prep sheet and a picture of someone's dog, was a post-it note in Sharpie. Remember why we cook. Rachel. Max chuckled. He hadn't seen it before, but it was perfect. Maybe even better than a mission statement. Friday night's family meal was a tradition now. No customers. Just the staff. One long table in the center of the dining room, mismatched chairs, food served potluck style. Tonight, Olivia made lemon rosemary chicken, and Rachel brought an apple galette that made people groan with joy. Max brought mac and cheese, his comfort dish. They ate. They laughed. Someone put on music. Someone else opened wine. For a moment, it felt like they weren't a restaurant crew. Just people who cared deeply about something they built together. Halfway through the meal, Olivia raised a glass. To us, she said. To surviving fires. Literally and otherwise. Everyone cheered. Then Rachel stood. To Max. For burning out and coming back stronger. There were chuckles, even Max laughed, but his smile was real. No speeches, he said, standing too, glass raised. Just this. I was lost. I forgot why I started. You all reminded me. So, thank you. They clinked glasses and sat back down, full in every sense of the word. The next morning, Max took a call from a reporter. A feature for the New York Times. Big deal. But the first question threw him. What do you think makes your restaurant different, Max? Everyone's talking about your comeback. What's the secret? He thought for a long second, watching the sunlight spill across the floor. The secret, he repeated. We stopped trying to impress people, and started feeding them. The reporter laughed. That's it? That's everything, Max said. 2 days before the award ceremony, a reservation came in that made Olivia blink twice. Name, Elon Musk. Request, chef's table for 2. Private experience if possible. Notes, will arrive via secure motorcade. She brought it to Max in the kitchen. He stared at it. Then looked up. Is this a joke? I triple confirmed, Olivia said. Apparently, there's a small state dinner happening in the city. He wants to come here. Just him and one guest. Max blinked. You're telling me Elon Musk is coming to our restaurant? Seems that way. Rachel, within earshot, laughed. Well, guess it's time for Max to drop some knowledge on a billionaire. The day came. The chef's table was cleared. The kitchen gleamed. Secret Service swept the back alley. And then, without much ceremony, he arrived. Max met Elon at the door. The man was casual, jeans, a black t-shirt, and that curious, calculated stare. His guest. A young woman with a quiet smile and a sketchpad. A designer, maybe. Or something else. They sat. They ate. Max cooked every course himself. No menu. Just instinct. Just story. Each dish told a piece of his journey. The opening calamari, charred, bold, unexpected. The risotto, slow, nurturing, earthy. The final course, a deconstructed apple pie, spiced like fall and sharp with citrus. Elon took one bite of the last course, paused, and said simply, "You didn't design this for me, did you?" Max wiped his hands on his apron. No. I designed it for the people who stay. Elon stared at him. That's gutsy. Max shrugged. Being gutsy's what got us here. There was a beat of silence. Then Elon leaned back and smiled. You ever think about expanding? Max didn't hesitate. No. And just like that, the billionaire nodded, respect in his eyes. The rest of the meal passed in quiet appreciation. When they left, Elon shook Max's hand and said, "You've got something people can't replicate. Don't lose it trying." Later that night, after the doors were locked and the team had gone home, Max stood alone at the pass. He thought of everything that had led to this moment, failure, fire, fear. And how every crack in the foundation had only made the roots grow deeper. Tomorrow, they'd go to the ceremony. Maybe they'd win. Maybe they wouldn't. But the table was set. The heart was full. The purpose was clear. Whatever happened next, Max had already won. The theater was grand, far too grand, if Max was being honest. Gold trim, velvet seats, giant spotlights swinging across the ceiling like slow-moving suns. He adjusted his tie for the 10th time, pulling at the stiff collar like it might strangle him. He hadn't worn a suit since his cousin's wedding 6 years ago, and tonight he felt like a fraud walking through someone else's dream. The National Independent Culinary Awards was a formal affair. Industry giants, up-and-coming stars, food media, and celebrity chefs filled the rows. Max spotted Adrian from across the room, already holding court with a group of people hanging on his every word. They locked eyes briefly. Adrian gave a small nod. Respectful. Maybe even proud. Max looked to his right. Olivia was there, calm and radiant in a navy dress. Rachel was next to her, nervously tapping her fingers on the armrest. Louise had slicked his hair back and actually managed to look comfortable in a blazer. Their restaurant's name was printed in gold foil on the nominee list. Common Fire, Brooklyn, New York. It felt surreal. The ceremony dragged through awards Max had no connection to: Best Beverage Program, Lifetime Achievement, Sustainable Farming Partnerships. Applause. Speeches. Laughter. Then more applause. Then, finally, the moment arrived. The presenter, a well-known food critic from LA, took the stage. The category, she said, that represents the future of American dining. The independent chef, the neighborhood story, the passion project turned beacon of excellence. Here are your finalists for Best New Independent Restaurant. The screen flashed images and names. Juniper and Rye, Austin, Texas. Saffron Circle, Chicago, Illinois. The Bay's End, Portland, Maine. Zon, San Francisco, California. Common Fire, Brooklyn, New York. The crowd applauded. Max could hear Olivia exhale sharply next to him. He couldn't move. Couldn't speak. He just watched the envelope in the critic's hand. And the award goes to. She opened it slowly. Max held his breath. Common Fire, Brooklyn. For a second, no one moved. Not even Max. Then Olivia grabbed his arm and pushed him to his feet. The whole team erupted. Rachel screamed. Luis fist-pumped. Max just stood there in shock as the room stood and clapped, some polite, some enthusiastic, some genuinely surprised. He walked to the stage on autopilot. The critic handed him the award, a simple but beautiful glass flame mounted on black marble. "You earned this," she whispered. Max stepped to the mic. The lights were blinding. He looked out at the crowd and suddenly realized he hadn't prepared anything. But maybe that was the point. This entire journey had never been about perfection. He cleared his throat. "Hi. I'm Max. I cook food for people." Laughter. Friendly. Inviting. "This restaurant started because I wanted to make something honest. Not fancy. Not flawless. Just real. And at some point, I got lost chasing what people said success looked like. This team," he glanced at Olivia, Rachel, Luis, "they reminded me why we started. To feed people. To connect. To heal." He held up the award. "We're proud to be independent. Not because it's easy, but because it means every decision is ours. Every mistake, every win, it's all us. And if this flame means anything, it's that you don't need millions or hype to make something meaningful. You just need heart." Applause. Real, thunderous applause. Max stepped off the stage to meet his team. Olivia hugged him first, tight. Rachel next, eyes misty. Luis just grinned and slapped him on the back hard enough to knock the plaque loose. Later that night, back at the restaurant, the team gathered one more time around the long table, now crowded with takeout containers, cheap champagne, and the award itself sitting like a trophy in the center. "Speech," Rachel called out. "No more speeches," Max groaned. "Okay," Olivia said, raising her cup. "Then just this, we didn't win because we're trendy. Or because we got lucky. We won because we stopped pretending. Because we chose to tell the truth." They toasted. They laughed. Someone turned on music. And Max looked around the room, not as a chef or a boss, but as a man surrounded by people who had become his family. He remembered that first terrifying night after Musk's visit, wondering if they'd made the right choices. Wondering if the world would ever notice a small place like theirs. Now they knew, you don't need to shout to be heard. You just have to speak clearly, and cook with soul. Much later, as the team finally cleared out, Max stood alone by the pass once more. The kitchen dimmed, quiet again. He looked at the award sitting there. And for the first time in a long time, he felt enough. The next morning, the city moved like it always did, fast, indifferent, alive. Max walked through Brooklyn with his hands in his pockets, the award show barely 12 hours behind him, but already slipping into memory. Common Fire was closed for the day. A team-wide recovery break. His idea. They'd earned it. He strolled past the coffee shop where he used to write menu ideas on napkins. Past the bench where he and Olivia had shared takeout after their first disastrous service. Past the tiny storefront that had once housed a taco place, now replaced by a CBD smoothie bar. Everything changed. But some things, if you held on to them tight enough, stayed true. When Max returned to the restaurant, the sunlight cut through the windows in long golden streaks. The kitchen smelled faintly of citrus and rosemary, even though no one had cooked in hours. He walked the line, trailing his fingers along the cold stainless steel counters, listening to the silence. It wasn't the same kind of silence as before. This was peaceful. Earned. Like the restaurant was finally, at rest. On the bulletin board in the back was a new note, scrawled in Louis's handwriting. We feed people. That's the whole job. Max smiled. Later that day, Olivia arrived with 2 cups of coffee and no words. She handed him one, sat beside him at the bar, and sipped. After a while, she said, "You ready for what comes next?" Max glanced at her. "You mean more press? More influencers wanting to take selfies with the food before they eat it?" She smirked. "No. I mean, you. This restaurant." The after part of the story. He thought about that. About what "after" meant. Success, if you weren't careful, had a way of becoming a new burden. The pressure to stay on top. To be bigger. To be more. But Max didn't want to be more. He wanted to be better. Deeper. Wiser. More grounded. He didn't want to franchise. He didn't want to sell out. He didn't want to become the kind of chef who gave TED Talks instead of feeding people. He just wanted to keep cooking honestly. And let the rest follow. "I think," Max said slowly, "what comes next is exactly what came before. We show up. We feed people. We listen. We get better. Not louder." Olivia clinked her coffee cup against his. To not being louder. The next Friday, family meal returned like clockwork. No press. No reservations. Just music, laughter, and dishes passed hand to hand. Rachel made fried chicken. Luis brought his grandmother's arroz con pollo. Olivia showed up with fresh sourdough she'd been quietly learning to bake. Max made roasted vegetables, simple, perfect, humble. They ate. They talked. And as the sun dipped beyond the skyline, the restaurant glowed with soft, amber light. At the end of the table sat an empty chair. For anyone new. For anyone who might need a place. They'd all agreed to keep that chair open from now on. A small symbol of what they were really about. As people started to leave for the night, Max lingered at the door. He turned off the lights one by one, watching the room fall into darkness, then silence, then stillness. And just before the final switch, he paused. There, above the pass, written in white chalk from earlier that week, was the new kitchen motto. One Max didn't write, but instantly knew he'd never erase. Keep the fire honest. He smiled. And flipped the light off. In a world obsessed with being the biggest or loudest, common fire is a rare case of quiet mastery. Max's journey reminds us that true leadership isn't about dominating the room, it's about building a room where others can grow. The emotional climax wasn't winning the award. It was in surviving the burn, in repairing what broke, and in remembering why the journey started in the first place. The most enduring restaurants, like the most enduring people, are those that stay rooted, who resist the flash and stay close to the flame. And in the end, Max didn't shut Musk down with ego or outrage. He did it with clarity. With food that told the truth. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?